Week 2 of JAC back to order. So anyway, we're welcome. We're glad to be here today. Why don't we go ahead and call the roll to start off?
Good morning, members of the Joint Appropriations Committee. Representative Kinner. Representative Larson. Representative Schwartz. Representative Simpson.
Here.
Representative Stith. Representative Walters.
Here.
Senator Guru.
Here.
Senator Hicks.
Excused.
Senator Kinski.
Senator Kinski, are you there? He's traveling down and probably in and out of cell range, so he's excused for now.
Senator Steinmetz. Co-Chairman Nicholas. Chairman Perkins.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. So, Mr. Co-Chairman, any remarks or thoughts this morning you'd like to share before we get started?
Nice, brisk, lovely.
Yeah, it was a little bit exciting trying to get back to Cheyenne last night. So we came from different areas and some of us had to go different ways, and Senator Kinski, there wasn't a way but straight through it. So the roads are open and he's on his way. So anyway, welcome. We're our first office morning is Office of Guardian Ad Litem. So we've got Mr. Belcher, you're here this morning, and please go ahead. We'll go ahead and make your budget presentation. What we've been doing is typically going through, you have a very simple budget, but go through, and if anything in particular you want to tell us about your standard budget requests, I don't see any exception requests, but anyway, if there's other things you'd like to tell us about the operation of your department, we would love to hear it this morning. So with that, go ahead. We'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having us here. As you mentioned, we are the Office of Guardian Ad Litem. This is our end of our first full year as a standalone independent state agency. If this committee remembers, last year we were moved out from under the Office of Public Defender to be by ourselves. And that took place effectively July 1, 2020. And so here we are with our really our first full biennium budget before you today. With me to my left is Denise Herman, our budget analyst, and behind me is Kim Scutari Johnson. She's what we call our permanency attorney. She handles all our termination, parental rights, and
I'm sorry, what was her name again?
Kim Scutari Johnson. And she's our permanency attorney. Senator Perkins, she handles our termination, parental rights, and appeals to the Wyoming State Supreme Court. And so, as you mentioned, we have a pretty straightforward budget, pretty simple. It's relatively small in the overall state of Wyoming budget. We're less than 1% of the overall state budget. And actually, we're about 0.25% that makes up the governor's budget request today. Without further ado, I guess we can get right to it and go through our budget with the committee, unless anyone has any opening questions or comments.
No, go ahead. I think as you go through this, it's your first year of operation. Let us know. Some things you thought have worked out well, some things that they're a little bit different than you thought they might be. So any particular challenges that you have, we'd like to hear about those, and then anything in particular about your budget. Yes, please go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you. And particularly when I looked at your budget, it's the words that you used are identical from what we saw 2 years ago. And so what we don't see is much creativity and a direct explanation of your office, how your first year has gone along. So if you did, just focus a little bit on that so we know what you're doing.
Sure.
If you have any impacts because of the COVID and how that's affected some of your, particularly your contract staff and that type of thought, just bring us up to speed to where you're at.
Well, Representative Nicholas, we kind of maintained status quo, we thought, just through that first year to make sure that no surprises or anything out there was going to come up. And so we kind of maintained status quo from what we had the year prior to. And so far, we bring pretty much the same budget as we feel that right now that is for this biennium it's going to be adequate for us. We have certainly more of our budget comes out of our 900 series, which is our contractors around the state. And then in our 100 series, and just for the committee to know, we have 24 contractors that operate with us around the state. And then we have 6 full-time state attorney guardian ad litems that work for us around the state. So again, the majority of our budget in our salaries is made up of our contractors. And so each contractor is contracted by an amount that includes within that amount is their number of cases that they represent kids around the state. And so we're always looking at our contract numbers and making sure that we are adequately representing children around the state. And so we're always making sure that numbers aren't too low or contractors are being overwhelmed. So we're constantly looking at our board, our state of Wyoming map, and making sure that our numbers are fiscally sound with what we're paying out for contractors. And right now with COVID, and we feel that we're appropriate with that. We've lost a lot of our mandatory reporters when kids weren't in school last year when COVID hit. And so our numbers were down across the state in abuse and neglect cases being reported. But we're slowly, as schools go more full time, those numbers are increasing back up. And I would imagine within the next year, we'll probably be at our normal reporting numbers for abuse and neglect cases across the state.
So Joe, did you have any cost savings as a result of being less busy?
We 2 years ago, we cut $400,000 in contract money. And so we're running at that number right now, Representative Nicholas. And currently we feel we're okay on that. And just so the committee knows, we are down 1 full-time state employee. And so we feel we can handle that person's caseload internally, and we'll hold that position kind of in our hip pocket until probably next spring and start advertising where we want that position to go to. Generally in the past, when we had a state position open, it has taken a while to fill that position. And so we probably expect to advertise that in April and May, and hopefully we can have that filled sometime in the summer.
And Mr. Co-Chair, your regular aid entity report to is the judiciary? Is that
Yes,
correct?
you're, yes. That's right.
And I'm just curious, after your first year and a half of operations, if you've got suggestions for statutory changes for, things to be more efficient or more useful or more, using your folks better or more. Tell us about that a little bit.
Representative Nicholas, certainly we still need to do some statutory cleanup where we're still connected in statute to the public defender's office. And so we need to go through that and make those changes. And then probably one of the things that we need to look at is maybe how and what is required of counties to house us. Right now in statute, it just says to provide us with, I think it's office spaces, how it's worded with, and I can't think of but basically we need to make sure that's going forward. That includes appropriate data lines to get connected to the state's computer system, to our case management system. And so make sure that an office is an office. What we expect today, we need that internet service to connect to the state. And so we've seen that sign of that, maybe tighten up that language a little bit more, where we've been moved out a couple places where we've had to have that issue where, hey, who's going to put in the data line, who's going to do the cleaning, who's going to do this and that. And so just those type of things. I think our appointment in abuse and neglect cases is right now it's it's fine. I think one thing Representative Nicholas Wealth going forward is maybe changing a little bit of that language as the federal government kind of goes to more of a preventative model for child welfare, and maybe we can get some language in the future where the guardian ad litem program comes in earlier than just that an appointment when a petition has been filed. And so those are some of the things that we're going to be looking at in the next year with our statutory language and cleanup.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a couple of questions if I could. I didn't understand really how you contract with your contractors out in the state. I'm trying to understand if that's on a per billable hour type thing, or if it's you're.
Sure.
How does that work?
So different contractors are paid different rates. We have contractors that are solely contractors that do nothing but guardian ad litem work. So that's all their legal practice is. And so they're paid a flat rate, and within that flat rate, they are required to carry a number of juvenile cases. And so that goes up to 80 cases. And sometimes some go over and carry more than that, depending on the flow of their community. Some hover around that number, and some fluctuate underneath that number and go back and forth. Some contractors are part-time guardian ad litems where they have additional practice requirements in their private practice. And so they're paid a lower amount, sometimes $1,000 a month for 10 cases. And sometimes $4,000 for up to 40 cases.
Thank you. And follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
I'm trying to envision how that works. If you say, if I'm your contractor and you say I have to have at this rate, then I have to have so many juvenile cases. How do I go out and get those juvenile cases? I mean,
Representative Nicholas, Representative Larson. So what happens is in your area, you'll have what is called, we have a supervising guardian ad litem. And so when a petition is filed by the county attorney, that supervisor will contact you and say, a new petition has been filed. I'm going to assign you this case. And then you, as an attorney, GAL will enter an entry of appearance with the juvenile court at that time, and then off you go.
okay. And then my second question, Mr. Chairman, if I may, is I looked at your summary on your standard budget request on page 9 there under the client population, and you alluded to this a little bit earlier, but the last sentence says, those in the child welfare industry believe there's a large population of unreported children involved in abuse and neglect. It's a pretty broad statement. And so who's those? And what, if you could give, when you make those kind of statements, give us a little more, refine that, who that is, because this is just a sentence that's just out there that has no basis behind it.
Go ahead, Director.
Representative Nicholas and Representative Larson. That is a broad statement. That statement was kind of ascertained through, we work closely with Department of Family Services at the school districts and other child welfare agencies around the state. And that's kind of what they feel in their communities. It's not a, yes, I can't pinpoint a citation to or anything like that, but that's just during that COVID area when no one was going to school. That was just an underwhelming underlying feeling of those in the child welfare that our main, like I said, our main reporters was the education community, and of course they weren't seeing kids, and so they felt, we have kids that are out there that just we don't know about, and that's kind of where that statement generated from.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Representative Schwartz.
Thank you. So to follow up on that a little bit, because your general pipeline was disrupted and then we weren't seeing the counseling services that we might have, and now you're seeing an uptick in cases, are you noticing an increase in complexity or severity in these cases?
Well, Representative Nicholas, Representative Senator Perkins, Representative Schwartz, that's a very good question. I think you know, I don't know how to answer that. I just know that, you know, each case is unique on its face. And so, I can tell you this, is that anytime kids are involved in trauma, it always presents a unique case, whether it's, you know, trauma from parents losing jobs to increased stressors in the household.
Anything else, Representative Schwartz?
No, thank you. I could go on, follow this for a while, but I don't think we need to in this.
Okay,
this
thank
time.
you. Just a quick question about, as I understood, you've got 10 employees, but you've got one vacancy that you've had vacant for how long has that position been vacant?
Just a short time.
Just a short time. And so you're hoping, you're waiting a little bit and you're hoping to send that out and have that filled by the beginning of the fiscal year.
That is
your
correct.
goal?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. The other, Dawn, just a quick question for staff on some of this, the statutory cleanup, but some of that candidate, some of those changes, would they be candidates for the revisor's bill?
Mr. Chairman, I suspect they would. One question might be whether or not these have been brought forward to the Judiciary Committee during this interim.
And I think we asked that question. I think your answer was you didn't think they.
It has not.
Yeah, it has not. Okay, so, all right, and all right. One note we just might want to make, so I want to check with the attorney that staffs judiciary and maybe have them look at that and see what we can put into the revisor's bill to clean some of that up.
It seems there might be two, Mr. Chairman, it seems there might be two categories. One, some more substantive changes. Right. Versus the cleanup, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. So have him look at that and get what we can, the revisor's bill, and then we can maybe put that in the category for interim study for judiciary. Okay. Any other questions from the committee this morning? Thank you very much. Anything else, Director?
Nothing from us.
Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you.
Next, we've got Environmental Quality Council. Oh. Good morning, Director Ray. How are you this morning?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm doing well.
Welcome to JAC, and we'll go ahead and turn the time over to you to present your budget.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I'm Jim Ruby. I'm the Executive Officer for the Environmental Quality Council. The budget is simple as usual. It is no exception requests. It is $581,522. It is based upon the same amount of money as we're ending this budget biennium on after the cuts and after the COVID cuts. The numbers, I think, speak for themselves. As in most agencies like ours, the majority of the funds all go toward human resources such as staff and the council themselves. The current council, as you may know, is 7 members appointed by the governor. Our current membership is John Cora here in Cheyenne. Most of you know him. Shane True out of Casper. Steve Lenz out of Sundance. JD Radakovich out of Cody. Marge Bedessem out of Laramie. Ryan Green out of Rock Springs. And Stan Blake, one of your colleagues out of Green River.
How's he working out? No, I'm kidding.
You know, he's doing really well.
Stan's a good man.
He is. He certainly is. He is fun to work with. Over the past year, January 1 through today, we have had 14 rule and contested case hearings filed with the council. I'd be happy to take any questions you may have. Like I say, I think it's pretty straightforward, but I'd be happy to talk with you about anything else.
Could you go ahead, Mr. Co-Chair?
Yeah, could you just walk us through roughly what those 14 cases are, how long they lasted, what the issues were, and how much time and effort you guys had to put in?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, those 14 cases, a majority of those were rulemakings brought by the department. They covered everything from solid and hazardous waste to water rules. There were some, I believe, at least one non-coal and one coal rulemaking during that year. The contested cases, I can't talk about 2 of them because they're currently open and they just opened. And so they're pending. I don't know what's going to happen with them. And they're so fresh that I did not put a summary together on as to exactly what each one is about. The other ones, one was a whippies violation permit that the council or that the department resolved through negotiations. And I'm going to forget what the other one was. I believe there was a total of 5 contested cases that were brought before the council this year.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, did you see just kind of a shutdown or a slowdown as a result of the COVID environment? And I'm looking, you talk about doing things more virtually with the committee.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, 2020 was a unique year. It was a cost saving year for us because nobody traveled. And that's a big expense for the council. And I can't tell you whether or not the shutdown, the government shutdown and other shutdowns with COVID had any impact per se with regards to the people who were objecting to actions, that occurred with them in the department. I can tell you that as I look back over the past 5 years, it's been kind of a steady stream. It's been nothing like when I came here in the 2008 when the coal bed methane issues were going hot and heavy. And some of you will remember those, some of you may not, but I know at least one, Representative Schwartz, participated in some of that. And so certainly from that point in time to now, our caseload is significantly lower. But over the past 5 to 7 years, I would say it's been fairly consistent. The department during Governor Mead's term implemented a reduction in numbers of rules. And so the department has been working their way through that requirement over the years. And we've been handling those as required by the statutes. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I forgot you had another question in there and I'm drawing a blank on what the question was.
That's okay. Me too.
Just following up there so your caseload doc has been relatively, it seems to be like it's relatively consistent. In your narrative, you also talked about the fact that you don't have a lot of experience with existing members. And so if you'd help us understand what the members and what you're doing to help bring them along with their education. And also if you could expand a little bit on you had cost savings because of travel during COVID. Are you changing any of your any of how you're conducting hearings and how you're conducting business in light of what you've learned about telehearings and telecommunications during COVID? Is that affecting the way that you are going to work going forward?
I'm going to take the last one first because it's more fun.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, the council's an interesting little character because we've been doing web-based hearings and bringing in witnesses and parties through internet, both of video and audio, since I came here in 2008. We once held a hearing when one of our council members attended from London. So it is the web, the actual Zoom kind of meeting stuff is nothing new to the council. The advancement in technology, though, has been amazing. The ability to, back in 2008, it was hit or miss. It was, it was freezing, unfreezing. It would be, oftentimes it would be, you'd hear like a third of what the person talking said. With Zoom and with the advancement in the speed that things are being transmitted, especially with the video, which takes so much bandwidth, it has been an amazing transformation in the ability for witnesses, as you may know, Mr. Chairman. Historically, courts and stuff have not really liked witnesses not to be in person because there's so much you lose in the ability to read a person's testimony from their facial expressions and their hand movements and all that stuff. With Zoom and the speed and the definition, a lot of that has been modified over the past year where people have been basically forced to have to try and do it. And I've been impressed with the council's ability to deal with that. Both they're not here and the witnesses aren't here and nobody's in the same room. Makes the complications way more, as you're aware. I mean, just having your hearings where you've been all over the place in your session with everybody everywhere. So that, based on our prior experience to now, just the advancement has been great. And it makes us feel better going forward that bringing witnesses in where parties have kind of demanded that they appear, sometimes because they wanted them there, sometimes maybe for other reasons. We know that it's going to be a doable process in most instances, if in fact we can make it more convenient for a party to not pay huge expenses for flying in witnesses that may be some distance away, such as in Texas or whatever. And the first question.
First question was about bringing along the education of your members.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Education in this realm really depends a lot on cases being filed. You can talk to somebody about the Administrative Procedures Act and how to handle a hearing, how to deal with people coming, before them, how to handle objections in administrative hearings. You can talk about that. But until you actually are faced with it and having to do it, you just don't know how anybody's going to react. And I think what has been the best for this group that we've got currently is that we have one member who has extensive experience in the area of environmental quality. He was the chair he was the director of DEQ. He was the chair of the Industrial Siting Council, and he's now the chair of the Environmental Quality Council. And oftentimes what works best in educating people with regards to how to handle a hearing is having them handle or observe somebody who does it well. And so what I've done generally is we've always tried to have the most experienced persons handle a hearing or two, and then hand off the next hearings to somebody who's observed him doing it. And it's a simpler hearing, usually a rulemaking. The rulemakings are less controversial. There's less quickness going on. There's never any objections per se about somebody's testimony. And so they get kind of the feel of how a process moves. And then we try as a contested case hearing comes in, the less complicated ones generally go to the least experienced members. especially if they're shorter ones. And then they evolve into that case because we'll have a pre-hearing conference. That gives them an opportunity to kind of get to know the parties a little bit, understand the issue more, and kind of get a feel for what the actual final hearing may be like, whether there's a lot of contention going on. Then between that pre-hearing and that final hearing, myself, oftentimes the Attorney General designee for the council, and that member will have a discussion about how to handle the people as they come forward. Because the council hears the evidence, and I can't, and it's not my job to teach them what the evidence tells them. That's just not appropriate. But what I can do is help them understand how to get the evidence in or out if there are objections or not. As most of you are probably aware, in administrative proceedings, the general rule is the evidence comes in and the decision maker takes the information that comes in, gives credence or credit and the amount of credit to any given piece of information that comes in that they believe it deserves. And then they have to write their findings of facts and conclusions of law that outline what the evidence was that they took and believed, and that fit the pattern, and how those facts fit into the law and what their ultimate result was. Some of the educational factors that we do is when we do travel, we try to go to places, one, where the cases are so they can kind of observe the ground where the cases are taking place. When we don't have those, we try to go to places where there are things that aren't currently pending before the council, but may have a tour that will give them an understanding of what goes on in a process. So last month we were in Laramie, and we went and the council took a tour of they do the 3D imaging. You can stand in it. It's the yeah, thank you, sir. Over at the university. In February of next year, if everything works out right, they're going to go and tour the carbon sequestration experimental facility up in Gillette. All of these things, and then we've also been having the various administrators from the department come in and give a breakdown of just a general overview of what each division does, which gives all the members at least an idea of the general lay of the law in the areas that they work in.
Okay, thank you very much. Other questions for the director? Any other questions? Go ahead. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following on that same education, but more within your office with only 2 staff members, one with 13 years, I think you note, and the other with 20+ years. What are you doing for succession planning? Are you putting together a series of white papers to leave in the file cabinet so someone would know how to handle these cases, or procedurally, not on the facts, but procedurally? And how are you handling that with such a small staff so that there's not a big gap when something changes?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters. Succession planning, this is just from my years of experience. Succession planning in leadership positions in appointed government entities is hazardous at best and often ignored as things play out, because appointed officials, there's just a different world that goes on there where they're appointed by a body or by a governor. And so it's not like a business per se, which I've operated in my past, where you lay out, where you've got a board of directors, where you've got shareholders or whatever that are involved in an active way in the management of that business, such as a family where they're handing it down from generation to generation, where you have inheritance tax issues and those types of things. And there's a long discussion about, are we going to sell the business? We aren't selling a business here. We don't have a hierarchy of people that are standing in line to move up, especially in my little agency. So no, there's not what I would call formal succession planning that occurs. Certainly there are discussions between myself and Joe, the person I work with, and the council when they exist, about the process of going to ANI, going to the governor and talking about what is the formal process working through ANI to bring someone on board? How do you recruit? How do you, that kind of stuff. But there is not a white paper or a formal document that says this is what you do.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Evan, go ahead.
Ruby, for your council members, what is your per diem rate? And do you also compensate them in any other way?
Mr. Chairman,
Good.
Representative Simpson, they are compensated in the exact same way as the legislator is. So they get the same per diem, the same travel, the same daily salary as you do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Any other questions for Jim? Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have a great day.
You too. I'll be back in 5 seconds. Okay. Director Parfitt, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome. Well, we're glad to have you here. You want, so we'll go ahead and turn the time over to you if you want to introduce your team or jump right in. You're certainly experienced at this, so we'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Todd Parfitt, the Director of the
Todd, I think you have to pull your mic just a little closer. Thank you.
You have to hear the echo.
After the echo or the, all the people attending online can't pick up
I see.
voice.
All right. How's that? Closer. Okay. Hold this, sit
Need to
straight
tell-
up.
Yeah, you're taller than the average director.
Yes. All right. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Todd Parfitt, Director of the Department of Environmental Quality. Here with me today are the administrators of the 7 divisions. To my right, Kimber Wickman, Administrator of the Management Services Division, also referred to as Administration. We also have Luke Esch, who's the Deputy Director and the Industrial Siting Administration. Jennifer Zigmund, Water Quality Division Administrator. Nancy Veer, Air Quality Division Administrator. Suzanne Ingalls, the Solid and Hazardous Waste Division Administrator. Kyle Wentland, the Land Quality Division Administrator. And Don Newton, the Administrator of the Abandoned Mine Lands Program. So a few new faces for you in terms of the administrators. We had a bit of a turnover in the last year in administrator positions solely due to retirements. We had 4 administrators that retired in the last year, a lot of institutional knowledge that went out the door, but we were fortunate to have those in the positions today that we do. I wanted to start out with a little bit of background before I get into the exception requests. First off, I just wanted to mention that we have a staff of 256 FTE plus 1 AWAC, so 257 employees, and they're great staff. They do a great job, and they're in jobs that they don't often hear that. But I just wanted to make sure I mention that because they do great work for the state of Wyoming. Now, that being said, we've had recent challenges in recruitment and retention. Specifically, right now we're sitting at 28 vacancies, which is 11%. To put that into perspective, over the last 10 years that I've been in this position, we typically run about 15 vacancies each month. And I get a report every month that shows where the vacancies are within the agency, and that's about 6%. So in the last year, we've seen that tick up a little bit, just to give you some perspective on that. So we took a look at to what employees are saying, why are they leaving? Why do we have the vacancies? And over the last 12 months, we had 48 exit interviews that we reviewed. We had more than 48 leave the agency in the last 12 months, but only 48 filled out the exit interview. It is voluntary for them to do that. But of those 48 exit interviews, 33% said they left because of compensation. There were also a number of retirements. 17% were because of retirement. Now, I want to kind of looking forward, we right now have 30 employees that are retirement eligible. So that's 12% of the workforce is retirement eligible today. Also, I think of importance is that we have greater than 40% of our staff have less than 5 years with the agency. And that's, again, it's back to the institutional knowledge and the importance of keeping that institutional knowledge. So now I'll take you to the State of Wyoming Compensation Facts document that was prepared by A&I. And just take you to the section under DEQ. You'll see that 4 out of the 37 class codes within the agency are less than 80% of the 2020 market. And when I looked at that, that's 43 FTE are below 80% of the 2020 market. And then 29 of 37 class codes are less than 90% of the 2020 market. And that's 194 FTE, or 76% of the agency is below 90% of the market. You add that to the cost of living increases throughout the state, and it becomes more difficult to attract and retain FTE or staff.
Excuse me, Todd. Go ahead. I'm curious, through those exit interviews, how many of those went to work for other governmental agencies or related fields where they got a significant, or, you know, a real bump in pay?
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas, yeah, where those individuals are going is typically to industry or to the federal, or a federal agency, and they are making significantly more in terms of compensation for doing the same type of work.
And most of those are not in Wyoming.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. Some are, but most, I would say, are in the Denver area.
Thank you.
So then, Mr. Chairman, just to kind of wrap this up, we are seeing fewer applications, and then when we are making offers to the top applicant, oftentimes we'll find that they turn the job down because of the compensation associated with that and the concerns that they have with housing and so forth.
Todd, looking at the governor's proposal, I mean, does it provide a significant increase for your baseline or your mean average wages that you think it'll make a difference?
So, Mr. Chairman, yeah, I think it'll make a difference. The first step is to address those that aren't making the minimum for the current market. But I think the second phase, where you base it on merit, I think that'll begin to address the issue in a significant way.
And so 2 other questions that I'm curious, and obviously yours is not the only agency or industry who's experiencing just loss of personnel. I think everybody is.
Mhm.
I work with Magic City Enterprises, and we're lucky if we have less than 25% turnover. It just gets worse over the last year and a half. And so how much of that 28 vacancies may be environmental, just from the terms of our new environment? I mean, have you looked into that?
So, Mr. Chairman, and I think what you're referring to is, since the COVID days, people are making decisions to leave for personal reasons. And what we saw in the 48 exit interviews, about 30% left for personal reasons. And those range from maybe their spouse took a job in another area or another state, but also just making decisions of not wanting to come back into the workforce. So yeah, I think there's a small percentage in that category.
Has your office management changed at all in terms of location, working from home, office space use?
Mr. Chairman, I wouldn't say that it's changed. I mean, obviously the last 18 months was quite difficult. We had everybody in the office essentially do telework beginning in March of 2020. We brought everybody back into the office in May of 2021, which coincided with the availability of vaccines and so forth. We do have options for telework on a very limited basis, primarily if there's somebody that is immune compromised or otherwise has a health issue or a family member with a health issue, we do accommodate that. But generally speaking, we don't do telework on a wide scale. That said, we have changed a lot of our work practices where we do take advantage of I wouldn't call it telework, but the virtual meetings and so forth. So the travel is reduced in those types of things. So I don't know if that answers the question as to what you were trying to get at. Anyway, so that's just what I wanted to bring it up. Those statistics and those numbers, and have the discussion as you consider the governor's proposal for salary adjustments.
Thank you, Todd. Continue.
All right. So, Mr. Chairman, now what I'd like to do is just give a little bit of background about the agency. Like I mentioned, we're comprised of 7 divisions. There are 2 acts that pertain to the agency primarily, and that's the Environmental Quality Act and the Industrial Siting Act. The 7 divisions, I'll just walk through those. The first is administration, which we have 13 FTE, and they manage the fiscal and the budget components of the agency, contract facilitation, they manage federal grants. And then here recently, we put all agency bonding under administration. It used to be spread out amongst the divisions, but just to get a better handle on and consistency on how we were managing bonds, we do manage over $3 billion in bonds associated with the agency and the agency's work. And then the last thing administration manages is the information technology and working with ETS and business cases. The next division is the Industrial Siting Division. We have 1.5 FTE in that division. And primarily what the Industrial Siting Division does is permitting for jurisdictional projects. And what I mean by that is projects that have a construction cost of $230 million or greater, or certain wind projects, certain solar projects. We manage that for the Industrial Siting Council. Now, the Industrial Siting Council is different than the Environmental Quality Council. It's a 7-member council appointed by the governor. And they're the entity that actually issues the permits for industrial siting. For all the other programs within the agency, I'm the one that issues the permits, the director. But with industrial siting, it's the council that issues the permits. And that's significant because if there's an appeal of an action by the council, it goes straight to district court. Whereas appeals of actions that I may take as director are appealable to the Environmental Quality Council and then to district court if that's the path it takes. The other item, as you're well aware, is that the Industrial Siting Council determines the impact assistance payments for each of these projects. And I know that there's been a lot of discussion over the last few years about that, and I'm sure we'll probably see some legislation along those lines.
I just made a note of that.
Go ahead, Representative Larson.
So, Director Parfitt, there is a bill in minerals on that matter. I think you and I have talked a little bit about that, but just want to make sure that you've looked at that and, could maybe give us, Representative Hyder and I have worked to try and put that in place. If you and Director Esch could, if you see any concerns or something, let us know before we thought that would have was scheduled to have been made into a formal bill, but our special session set that committee meeting back. And so I think they're going to look at that maybe yet this year. Will it be in January? But would just appreciate your thoughts on that if you have any.
Okay. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yeah, I think a lot of thought has gone into that. I think you're talking about the tiered approach. We don't see any concerns with that. That could give some certainty, if you will, to the process. And I think it helps the Industrial Siting Council a bit in terms of how they make their decisions for impact assistance. So we will participate in the conversations on that during the Minerals Committee, which I think will be in January.
Yeah, continue.
The next division is the Air Quality Division, and this is the largest division within the agency, and I'd say one of the more complex and challenging divisions. We have 72 full-time employees, and right now we have 14 vacancies in air quality, and that's 19% vacancy rate, and that can be a real challenge and put a lot of additional burden on the existing employees to maintain the same level of service that we do provide. A couple of things that are on the forefront right now under the new administration, we're having discussions on regional haze. I'll talk a little bit about that when we get into the exception requests. But regional haze, we're starting the second round of regional haze, but we haven't finished the litigation involved with the first round of regional haze. When we submitted those plans, I think it was back in 2011. And then EPA partially approved, partially disapproved some of our regional haze state implementation plans. And there's been litigation on 3 of the facilities associated with this. So that takes up a significant amount of staff time when we get into that type of litigation. I would say that we have a rural and SIP development program, and we're seeing a lot more work coming down the road under this new administration because of the number of rules that are being moved by EPA currently. The next division.
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Director Parfitt. Before we leave air quality, I'd just like to follow up on a conversation that Chairman Nicholas and you and I had regarding some of the challenges we had with new construction and old construction, particularly at the Life Resource Center and handling the abatement and the discovery of hazardous materials that could possibly be airborne, and then how we dispose of that. And my memory has it that at the conclusion of that conversation, you thought that you would maybe get your the various divisions, air quality and solid waste, and kind of formulate some more standard. There were gaps in the process because it was difficult to understand how and when and what the various rules applied. And I've just been thinking as we now are completing those projects, both in Evanston and here, and we're going to have a pretty significant amount of demolition taking place over the next number of years that would this could come back into play, and it can certainly impact, as you recall, the budget of those projects. And so have you followed up and had additional conversations to maybe stabilize and help us better understand what is going to be required, when and how, and for the contractors?
So, Mr. Chairman, yes, we've had conversations with construction management services in particular. And I think the key is the early communication, and we do this now pretty regularly. When you have an entity that has a project, a sizable project, we invite them to come into the office and sit down with each of the programs that are relevant, and so that we can go over what would be required of them from each of the programs, each of the divisions. And so for these up and coming projects, we will again encourage, not you specifically, but construction management to come in and have those conversations with us so we can identify any concerns up front rather than during the middle of the project.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So would you remind me, for example, if we were at the state hospital on some of those old historic or some of those buildings that are now abandoned, as they are raised, are the requirements for handling those demolition materials different for a governmental entity versus a private entity? So if I own those buildings, am I held to a different standard than Chairman Nicholas, who maybe is the governmental entity?
Mr. Chairman, the answer is no. Everybody's held to the same standard.
Okay. So requirements would be the same, Mr. Chairman.
They're health-based standards.
Okay,
So they would, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Kutcher.
Yeah, so I would just like to follow up on that, Todd. I haven't seen the numbers, but I think our calculations were that process in Lander probably cost us between $7 to $9 million. And as it unfolded, we learned that we were being improperly instructed on what to do and where certain materials needed to go and why. And that the position of the agency would change over time as to what needed to be done and how it needed to be done. And so what I'm thinking is maybe it might be of value to sit down with myself and with your office and Lloyd and kind of walk through it so we can recreate the timelines of what happened and the whys and wherefores, and then come up with a plan or to either, on those large type of projects, either to have some type of an advocate or someone in your office who will help walk us between air, water, and the different entities so that and facilitate getting everything done in a timely fashion, and the shutdowns that occurred and how to mitigate that for everybody, so that obviously we do our job, we comply as wherever possible with everything that we're supposed to, but at the end of the day, we can save the state millions of bucks and probably do a better job and have more funds available. We've got 7 other buildings over there that if we took all those down right now, it cost us, if you use prior experience, or in Evanston, it'll cost us $7 to $20 million just to take down those buildings, literally. And but since we don't have that kind of money, we just got to sit there and let them rot, which does not make sense. And so I'm just trying to think of how do we make the world a better place and learn from our experiences. And it seems to me that's an exercise that we probably ought to do that would have some real value for the state.
So, Mr. Chairman, I know there wasn't a question in there, but just to respond to that, we did do a chronology and kind of a postmortem on that project. I know we had some conversations with Representative Larson and some others. What I will say is that I think there were a lot of things that could have been done differently and better on that project. We had a contractor that took material to their own personal site, which then had to be removed again. So there were some issues, I think, with the contractors. I think there were some issues with contract management, and I think, or construction management rather. And then there were some issues internally with the DEQ. I think collectively we can learn a lot from that process and do do that better in the future.
Thank you. Continue.
So, Mr. Chairman, I do want to just then turn to water quality, which is our second largest division. We have 70 FTE. We have a number of programs. A couple of things that are important right off the bat is we are spending a fair amount of time once again taking a look at what is the definition of waters of the United States. Under the previous administration, they moved on from what was called WOTUS and had a new navigable water protection rule that defined waters of the United States, what we felt was more appropriately, specifically excluding ephemeral streams from jurisdictional determinate or from jurisdiction under waters in the United States. The current administration is rolling that back and taking another look at it. And so we're engaged with EPA on those discussions. As it stands right now, because of some recent court rulings, we are operating under the 1986 definition of waters of the United States. So that's one thing that we're looking at currently, and the other is on 401 certifications, and they kind of go hand in hand. But what we do is we certify projects that are dredge and fill projects, typically through the Corps of Engineers. We provide a certification on whether or not that's going to have an adverse impact to, well, actually that it won't have an adverse impact to water quality standards. That the important part of that is we believe that under the 401 certification process under the Clean Water Act, it should be limited to water quality issues. There are some that take the position that it should be broader than just water quality issues. So that debate and discussion is now ongoing again. And we are operating, I think, under the 1973 definition of what a 401 certification is because of some recent court decisions. So there's a lot going on there that we have to stay in front of and make sure that our positions are advocated and heard. So just really quickly on water quality, we do have the surface water discharge program. We have a water quality lab that's located here in Cheyenne, which is co-located with Department of Health lab and the criminal lab. We have a groundwater program. Most notably, we have under the groundwater program, we have the underground injection control for subsurface discharges, which includes the Class 6 carbon sequestration, which we became the second state to have primacy for the Class 6 carbon sequestration program in August of this year. We also manage federally the formerly used defense sites and military installations, as well as other groundwater projects. We have an ambient monitoring program and a watershed management program that's together, and they develop the water quality standards and address the non-point source pollutants. And then lastly, we have the water and wastewater engineering and permitting group. And that group works very closely with the Office of State Land and Investment and the Water Development Commission on the implementation of the clean water and drinking water state revolving fund programs. Next is the Solid and Hazardous Waste Division. We have 41 full-time employees in the Solid and Hazardous Waste Division. And under that, we have the storage tank program, which is aligned with the corrective action account. We have the solid waste program. As you recall, we have the cease and transfer program where small communities that decide that they don't want to continue to operate a landfill because they can be very expensive. These communities can apply for funding to cease or close their existing facility and put in a transfer facility to take their waste to a more regional landfill.
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious, how many landfills have we closed with this program?
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, I'm glad I wrote this down. We have closed 20 landfills and 11 communities have put in transfer facilities.
And since when? I mean, it seems to me that there's, if you go back to the beginning of the program, it's substantially more than 20, but.
Mr. Chairman, it's 20 have closed their facilities since the beginning of the cease and transfer program, which I want to say was around 2015 or 2016.
Okay. There were a lot that were closed before then too. I mean, we've been working on this for a long time.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. In addition, we have a hazardous waste program. We have primacy for implementation of the hazardous waste program, which we received that primacy in 1995. We have a voluntary remediation program, and then we have an orphan sites where there's no responsible party program to address those. There were 28 orphan sites that we had identified. 6 have been completed. 13 are currently in remediation and 9 are pending investigation.
Go ahead.
Director Parfitt, can you, if you have cease and transfer stations, how do they determine what landfill that they take that to? Where is that governed within the solid waste district that the cease and transfer stations lie? Or is there statutory requirements to say you can't take your solid waste? Or is it just purely a low bid gets the solid waste?
So, Mr. Chairman, that's a local decision. They can decide where they want to take their waste. The fact that they have a transfer facility does not lock them into one specific receiving landfill.
Okay. And Mr. Chairman, follow up on your storage tank program and the inspection of that. A couple of 3 years ago, you upgraded the requirements for piping and stuff that went for the storage of motor fuels. And does that, there's been some question up in my part of the world that is only applies to commercial facilities within a municipality. That if you're outside a municipality, that perhaps those storage facilities wouldn't comply by the same requirements. Is that accurate? Or
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, if I understand your question, in terms of which facilities are subject to the storage tank rules, isn't really governed by whether or not it's in a municipality, it's whether or not it's for commercial sale.
it is if it's for commercial sale?
Yeah.
Okay. So farm and ranch doesn't apply, but if it's for commercial sale, it does.
That would be correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Go ahead. Representative Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, water quality question for you. If a developer has a body of water transferring across his property and wants to divert that and build storage ponds for aesthetic reasons, what is your relationship with the Corps of Engineers? Who permits that type of activity?
Good.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure I completely understand the scenario, but if they're going to put fill material in a drainage in order to facilitate storage of water, is that the scenario?
Correct.
If it's determined by the Corps of Engineers to be a water of the U.S., which is, there's a lot of uncertainty around that. But if it's determined to be a water of the United States, then the Army Corps of Engineers would issue a 404 permit for that activity, and we would issue a 401 certification on the 404 permit. So we would both have a role to play. The core would be the permit for the activity. Our 401 certification would be to say that it won't adversely affect the water quality standards.
Mr. Chairman, follow up.
Yep, go ahead.
So who looks at evaporation and seepage in the ponds in terms of water rights?
So, Mr. Chairman, that would fall under the state engineer's office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. The questions, continue.
All right, the last two divisions are one is land quality, where we have 44 full-time employees, and that's the land quality division is structured in a way that there are three main categories. The first being coal, second non-coal, and then the third is the uranium recovery program. Under the coal program, we do have primacy for implementation of the requirements under SMACRA, that's the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act. And we have oversight by the Office of Surface Mines under the Department of Interior and how we implement that. Right now, we have 28 coal permits in the state. The other area is non-coal, so those would be your bentonite, trona, sand and gravel, et cetera, anything that's not coal or uranium. And we currently have 642, they'd be called notifications or permits in the non-coal area. And then lastly, we have the Uranium Recovery Program, which we became an agreement state with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to have authority to do that back in 2018, and we currently have 15 licenses under that program. Then we have the last division is the Abandoned Mine Lands Program, where we have 13.5 FTE. And it's there are two basic programs, the first being the reclamation program. So any pre-1977 activity is eligible for reclamation. Two important points under the reclamation program that I want to point out, and that they're related to the recently passed infrastructure bill. The first is that the AML program had sunsetted October 1 of this year. And so with the reauthorization or the infrastructure bill, the reauthorization was included in the infrastructure bill at a new rate of 22.4 cents per ton for 13 years. The previous rate or fee to coal was 28 cents per ton. So we saw a reduction in the reauthorization. And that's in effect now. The other component of the infrastructure bill related to AML was that there was 11.2 billion made available based on pre-1977 coal production. And so when you look at that, Wyoming will receive approximately 150 million additional AML dollars over to the next 15 years, or well, yeah, equally distributed over the next 15 years. So at about 10 million a year for the next 15 years, in addition to the traditional AML funding that we've received.
Go ahead.
So, Director Parfitt, would that then apply to some of those old historic coal mines that you may even have seen, might even have been territorial coal mines that maybe have issues that we have not addressed?
So, Mr. Chairman, yes, anything that would be pre-1977.
Great.
Mr.
And
Chairman.
then follow, Mr. Chairman, under this new, we had a reduction of overall. Remind me, is that a 4951 breakdown? I was thinking there's an administrative fee that the feds keep or do something with.
Yes. So, Mr. Chairman, yes. So the state receives 50%. OSM receives 50%, and they take their administrative costs out of their 50%.
Out of their 50%.
Yeah.
So we get the full 50%.
That's correct.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just one other clarification. In recent years, there had been sequestration tied to the AML funds. And I don't recall, I think there was some discussion, but it didn't make it into the final bill. But there was some discussion of reimbursement of those past sequestration funds, which would have been over 20 million for Wyoming.
And that, Mr. Chairman, so that discussion is where?
Well, I think that discussion is passed. That was part of the discussion with the reauthorization.
Then, Mr. Chairman, if I might follow up, Director Parfitt, I think you and I had, and perhaps Chairman Perkins talked a little bit now, and with Dawn stepping into the responsibility for the abandoned mine stuff. We just want to make sure that as we evaluate those, the projects that are out there, that we're looking far enough ahead and trying to address those projects to where our Wyoming contractors have the capacity and to do that, and not get behind the 8 ball to where we have to do large projects that are outside their perhaps their bonding capacity or whatever. You feel like maybe I'm maybe Dawn's the one to answer that, but or we feel like we kind of hit a little snag there last year, I think a little bit that we talked about, and I know you worked hard to resolve it, but we kind of, I guess my question is, do you feel like we're have a little better control of that now?
Mr. Chairman, in fact, I might just ask Don if he wants to come up and address that, if that's.
I appreciate, because I also have a bonding question for him as well. He's the.
You can stand and use the karaoke mic, or you can take a seat at the table, either one.
If you stand, you have to sing, right, Mr. Chairman?
You don't have to sing just because you have a karaoke mic. You can just talk.
Mr. Chairman, we do look at the size of our projects because that can be an issue, especially in our grouting projects. It can be, upwards of $10 million projects. And at times we do split those up into smaller projects. And it's mainly to try to broaden the number of contractors that we use. And we do use some out-of-state contractors. The in-state contractors get a 5% preference. But there's not that many people that do this type of work.
And Mr. Chairman and Don, our concern is that as you know, is that sometimes we package those that are, even though they have a preference, they can be packaged in a way that exceeds their capacity to do the project. And we would rather package them in a way that would allow that broader and to have all the players in instead of just a few of the big ones. So thank you for paying attention to that. And then, Mr. Chairman, and Don, you and I had talked earlier in the year, we kind of put an additional responsibility on you guys as we changed the capital construction bills, and we put that responsibility for oversight of bonding on your AML stuff with you. And so when I heard Director Parfitt talk about bonding, you guys cover a broad stretch of types and kinds of bonding requirements. Are you comfortable where with that responsibility that we put on you to evaluate the bonding requirements for your AML contractors now, or am I making sense with that question?
Mr. Chairman, yes, you are making sense. And that, as you well know, was something that was not, the pressure that was put on our program was somewhat unexpected. And I think we've handled that. And it was kind of the perfect storm, because we had not only our large bonds, but we had our statewide bonds, which was tens of different companies. And so I think we've got that handled now. So, but I appreciate you asking that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Director Parfitt, Administrator Newton, thank you for being here. My question relates to the AML division. More than half of the department's budget is in abandoned mine lands, $103 million out of $176 million. And then inside that, there's of the 103 million, $99 million is contract services. That's a big number. It's a lot of money. It's more than half your agency. When I read the budget and if I look on the website for DEQ, for example, I can't tell how that money's, what projects that's going to be spent on. And so I have a couple of questions about that. One of my most pressing questions is, are there any projects that you regard as public facilities projects that you intend to spend that $99 million on, or do you intend to spend all $99 million on what you regard as priority 2 or priority 1, 2, or 3 projects?
So, Mr. Chairman, I'll start on this one. As far as those funds being used for public facilities, we would have to have completed all of the work on the inventory for the class 1, 2, and 3. I don't anticipate, based on the inventory, and Mr. Newton can provide where our inventory stands, but we can't by federal law use that money for public facilities until such time that we've not spent but funded all of those other projects.
Mr. Chairman, follow up.
Go ahead, Representative.
So my next question is, do you have a process when there's a dispute, say, or a contention between your constituents who might think that their project is a priority 3 project and eligible for funding now, but your staff thinks that it's, say, priority 4, 5, or otherwise not a priority 3 project? Do you have any process for resolving that? So, for example, do you ask the Attorney General for an opinion about whether reclaiming a stream that was adversely affected by coal mining processes before August 3, 1977 would be a category priority 3 project that should be funded? Do you have a process for resolving that kind of dispute?
Mr. Chairman, thanks for that question. By definition, priority, you start with 1 and work your way down. And we have a tremendous amount of priority 1 and 2 projects, which are dealing with health and safety, not priority 3, which is dealing with environmental issues. So even if we were to determine that a stream was a priority 3 environmental issue, it would still be very far down on our list of what we're going to address in the near future.
And Mr. Chairman, a final follow-up, if I may. Director Parfitt, Administrator Newton, thank you. And what if, since priority 1 includes damage to an extreme danger of property damage, what if you have a situation where someone says, hey, we think that being exposed for several decades to the danger of flood is an extreme danger to property, and that repairing this stream, this creek, for example, should be a priority 1 project? Do you have a way of resolving that issue? That is, in other words, priority 1 is extreme danger to, among other things, property, right? And it seems that if you're in a floodplain and your houses are going to get washed away, if there's a danger of that, it seems like it's arguably potentially a priority 1 project. Do you have a mechanism for resolving that kind of dispute?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, well, first off, I'm not sure that we've encountered that type of dispute in the past, but I would say it would have to be an eligible project to even entertain the conversation.
So I take it, Mr. Director, that what you're saying is that you've not asked the Attorney General for an opinion about whether the Bitter Creek project is eligible for AMO funds as a priority 1, 2, or 3 project. Is that a fair statement?
Mr. Chairman, I don't recall whether or not the Attorney General's office has looked at that, but we've looked at it on numerous occasions over the years and have not been able to determine that it's eligible under the current rules, federal rules, or state rules.
Mr.
Go ahead,
Butcher,
Mr. Butcher.
I've got a question. What's the overall impact of the infrastructure bill when they're modifying the cents per ton from 22 to 28, or the other way around? I forgot what it was.
So, Mr. Chairman, essentially what it means is that there will be 5.6 cents less per ton collected and you divide that by 2, you divide it in half, because that would be the amount coming back to the state.
So 2.5 million a year?
Well, it depends on the production, right? And so at the production levels, at 100 million tons, we're going to get, collect 22.4 million instead of 28 million. So that would have been 14 million versus 11 for every 100 million tons of coal produced.
So is that the purpose of the offset on the ML, the AMLs, where we get the extra 10 million a year? I mean, or what was the?
Mr. Chairman, I think, and this was Senator Manchin from West Virginia, and I think the idea was if you look at what the remaining reclamation needs are, the largest needs are in Pennsylvania and West Virginia. And the way that's structured is it's based on historical coal production, not current coal production. So they look at that, and that then directs most of the money to those communities or those states where historic coal mining occurred, because they're not collecting AML dollars today because the amount of coal production is far less than what it was. So for example, Pennsylvania is going to get 3.8 billion of the 11.2 billion. West Virginia, I think, is 2.1 billion. And Wyoming is 155 million because it's pre-1977 production.
So have you done a projection of total overall funds that we won't be receiving as a result of that change in the tonnage? The 22 to the 28 down to 22.
Mr. Chairman, I think the best way to put that is, yeah, we will collect less, but it's dependent upon the production levels. And so if you look at 2008 levels, it looks pretty good. If you look at recent years, it's going to be less than what we've collected in the past. I would say that we're going to collect somewhere in the neighborhood of, or receive somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 35 million a year under this new formula, under the traditional. And then that'll be supplemented with an additional 10 million a year, roughly, under the other provision in the infrastructure bill. So about 40 to 45 million would be the range.
That's taken into consideration the existing decline in production that we've seen over the past 15 years.
That's correct.
Kind of the same trend.
Yeah.
So did Craig take that into consideration when we saw these numbers, or it was after the numbers?
Mr. Chairman, this is not a component of Craig
Okay.
because all of the money goes solely for the purpose of the
Yeah.
AML remediation.
Okay, thank you.
So if you know, is the coal production in Pennsylvania and West Virginia, is it kind of proportionally about the same decreases that we're seeing in Wyoming, or is it even worse? If you know.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know that offhand.
Yeah, I mean, so regardless of where the coal is being produced, again, it's being allocated on the pre-1970 historical coal production. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Any other questions? I do have any other questions? So I think that gets us all the way through your budget book.
Well, Mr. Chairman, yeah, now I want to walk through the budget book. if I could.
Okay, all right.
It was
I
a
thought we
long
were.
background, but
Let's
So,
just
That's
just
good,
skip
because
all
I
those
got
exception
some questions
requests.
back on some of these exception requests. So anyway, thank you. So let's go ahead, Todd.
it was a good try, though.
What's that?
It was a good
Yeah,
try.
I was going, he's not even talking about, I was following along through, and you're going, man, he missed that one and that one and that one, that one, that one.
So, Mr. Chairman, before I start on the budget book, just one thing I would like to say is that we were requested at the last JAC meeting to ensure that we brought in somebody to the administrator position of AML, that they exercise good judgment, and I think that Don does exercise good judgment.
Well, we would hope you wouldn't bring in somebody who exercises bad judgment. So that's a good sign. So thank you.
No.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, what I'd like to do is take you to page 4 of the budget book.
Okay.
And this is the summary table. And I think as Representative Stith pointed out, when you look at the summary table, a large portion of the agency budget is associated with abandoned mine lands. And what I'd like to do is to break that out so that I can see what it costs for the rest of the agency without the outlier of the 103 million from AML. And what you'll see is that subtracting out the AML portion, you're left with 73 million for the agency. 45% of that is general funds. 26% is federal funds and 29% is other funds or fees. Why that's important for my sake is I look at that and see how we compare on a national scale, and that 27% federal funding is right at the national average. It varies from state to state, but
Could you give us, Mr. Chairman, could we ask him to give those percentages again?
Sure.
yeah, certainly. It's 45% general fund, 26% federal, and 29% fee.
And that's excluding the $100 million for AML.
That's correct.
Yep.
Okay, so moving on, I'd like to go to page 12. On page 12, I don't want to get into a lot of detail here, but just to point out that these are the exception requests. We have 6 exception requests. And of that, it works out to, with the governor's recommendation in approvals, actually works out to 1.96 million. $1 million of that is associated with the zero-based IT for software and hardware. 600,000 is other funds, and 700,000 is requests for general funds. And we'll get into each one of the exception requests here as we move along. So moving to page 15. If it's okay with you, Mr. Chairman, rather than going through each one on the standard budget, just to make one blanket statement is that the governor recommends approval of all the standard budget for all the units
Right.
in the budget. So I won't repeat myself on those.
Okay.
But just take you to the first exception request, which is HR consolidation. This is priority number 6. And as you'll recall, this is associated with the Alvarez and Marcel efficiency study that was done several years ago. We had 2 full-time employees that were doing the human resources work for the agency. That has shifted over to the Department of Administration and Information. That works out to a $378,000 reduction in the administration budget. So far, the consolidation of the HR positions for our agency anyway has worked very well. It's been pretty seamless. And so we're very happy with how things are working there.
And are your particular 2 HR folks, are they in the same office that they used to be in? They're just, or has the location and your access to them changed?
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, we provide the office space and computer and desks and all that. And they're in the same offices that they were before.
All right.
They just do some work for other agencies as well.
Okay.
And then the governor recommends approval of this exception request. The next one is on page 20. And this is what I refer to as kind of the zero base. This is the second exception request. It's for IT-related operating expenditures. This is our #1 priority. This involves the 200 series and 400 series for $1,043,000. The 200 series is related to the hardware and software for the agency. As I mentioned, it's zero-based, so it's zeroed out at the end of the biennium, and then we repopulate it after consultation with ETS. Then the 400 series is for data usage and storage, and we've seen an increase in the costs associated with that. And again, we determine what those needs are based on conversations with ETS and their approval as well. So the governor recommends approval of this exception request, and I'll stop there, see if there's any questions.
I just had a question. Do you monitor your overall 200, 400 series for IT or, as compared to your entire budget now that has evolved over the years?
Mr. Chairman, I would have to say no. We haven't gone back and done that. Something that we could certainly do to see how that may have changed over the years. I remember when the issue first came up, we had an amount in there, and then we were requested to put together basically an itemized list of what that was covering. And we go through that process now on a routine basis with our discussions with ETS.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Hey, Kevin.
technically the 400 series is zero base. What we do is we have actually a module inside of IBARs that starts at zero. And then what we do is we look at the actual usage that the agencies are experiencing. And then we go through that process with the ETS. They establish their rates for whatever they're trying to pay for. If their cost of the service is going down, the rate goes down. The cost of the service is going up, the ETS rate goes down. That all happens in Chapter 17. And then if an agency crosses over their exception or their standard budget, then they have to come to the Joint Appropriations Committee with an exception request similar to this one. So technically the 400 series is zero based. And when we go over the top of what they were experiencing in previous biennium, there's a necessity for exception request.
Mr. Co-Chair, so
Go ahead.
Kevin, that handout that we received last week that had, was a $220 million figure, I think, on IT costs for the state. Was that both 200 and 400?
Mr. Chairman, that's everything.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'd like to point out that if you compare that particular handout, the first thing that you like to do, or you really should do, is what's the comparison with the state of Wyoming and comparison with what the norm would be in other states for the same services. Wyoming does pretty good in that ranking as far as what we do with IT and what the rest of the states are doing. And then lastly, one of the things that we've been discussing with the ETS, with the SAO and everybody else is you really want to do that inventory across the expanse of the enterprise. You want to look into every single budget center, even if it's not in the 292 or if it's not in the 400, because there might be paying it out of something else like the 900 series. So we want to get that inventory polished. And that's the Idaho example that we've been providing you. Once we have that overall inventory, then we can really start the process of doing a fit gap to say, are we paying for this twice? Or is there a better methodology of implementing that? And that goes through that fit gap, which I think that when we go through that whole exercise, we'll actually be in the lead with all the other states that are doing something similar. So we'll be in there with Idaho as a premier manager of IT in the state of Wyoming.
And just to follow up on that, because I'm curious about it, a lot of the agencies on their IT, we get the standard line as we're working in compliance with ETS on how we're doing it. And for example, the 4-year replacement of computers. Some agencies and some of our directives have been when our budgets are down is you don't need to replace a Word computer if all you're doing is word processing. And just because your warranty runs out, you run it till the computer dies and then you replace it, or if you can't fix it or that type of thing. But do you have that discussion with ETS?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. And we've had this conversation with you over the years several times as well. Our experience is once you get past the inventory, or excuse me, the warranties phase, for example, we used to call them resource computers, a computer that you're talking about, hey, all we're doing here is word processing. We did that. And then what happens is once that inventory, or excuse me, the warranty fails, then you find yourself into this situation where you're taking that computer and you're replacing with a new computer somewhere else and you're handing it down. And all of a sudden, just like you made the example the other day about how expensive the maintenance fee would be versus the actual computer itself. Now what we're doing is we got human resource costs across the enterprise trying to manage resource computers, which is more expensive than simply replacing the computers at the right time according to the inventory replacement recommendation that ETS has. So that's one example. Another example is that I've been using is that as far as security goes on these computers, think of having a screen door in your basement during a flood, or if you're in a flood zone, you probably want to have that not opened. Well, that's what happens when we get into older machines with older software operating and that kind of stuff. It actually creates an exposure for us on our security. And one single event could be catastrophic. And I think there's a couple of examples of some local governments that had ransomware situations on their hands. So it's just not about the piece of hardware itself. But here's what I'll finally say about this is the actual cost of the hardware in comparison to moving the machines around and the risk associated with security is minimal. But if you'd like to have the director of ETS opine on this in more detail, I think that would be okay.
I mean, I get a new computer?
Here's this. I think mine's more than 4 years old too. Anyway. Go ahead, Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kevin, while you're on that, could you get us that document that shows how Wyoming ranks in terms of our IT expenditures and efficiencies? Just, I know many members ask about that, and that way we would have a little bit of a better explanation how we rank.
Absolutely, ETS can help us with that, and I think it's in the older documentation that LSO had because we provided it before a couple of years back. But you bet we'll provide that to you.
Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, that was off the
fine.
DEQ topic, but relevant to the conversation.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Director, continue.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So moving on to page 21, we have the third exception request, which is for the Air Quality Division. It's the IT systems updates and upgrades. This is priority number 4 and is a one-time request. The system that we're talking about, it's called Impact, and it's specific to the Air Quality Division. It's the inventory monitoring, permitting, and compliance tracking system. The way this request is laid out, 340,000 of the 500,000 request would come from fee or other, and we do already have the funds available. We would just need the authorization to use those funds for that expenditure. And the request on page 21 is for the 160,000 of general funds, which would be a new appropriation request, and again, one time. Now this falls into the category of the 2014 request by the legislature for the agency to become entirely paperless, which was modified to be substantially paperless. We have deferred work on that initiative over the past years, primarily because of budget concerns, and we've been able to accomplish some of the upgrades through grants from EPA or other sources, but we're at a stage where we need to make additional upgrades. Now, we do share development costs with Maricopa County, Arizona, and I think to a small degree with Ohio, because we basically share that system. As we make upgrades, they have access to it. They make upgrades, then we have access to those upgrades at no cost to us. So we are developing, not only in this area, relationships with other agencies and areas around the country to help.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask if Mr. Parfitt could get closer to the mic?
So, yeah, my apologies, Senator Kinski. I'll
Oh,
get a little
Mr.
closer.
Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Schwartz.
Thank you. So is this just an initial effort where we're reaching out to Maricopa and Ohio and we're hoping to expand relationships, or is that sufficient?
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, no, this is an ongoing effort, primarily through what's called the Environmental Council of States. There's a group under ECOS called the E-Enterprise Systems. And so we work with all, and I'm on that board, and we work with all states to identify areas where we can share information and reduce costs for IT nationally. So all states are looking at these, and it works in some cases, it doesn't work in all, but we continue that effort.
Thank you. Continue.
Okay. What this project would do, it would enhance the ability of the regulated community to be able to more efficiently submit applications and file reports with the agency. It improves accessibility and transparency of the data. And importantly, it improves the timeliness of agency actions by 2 to 3 weeks per transaction. And keeping in mind that air quality manages over 25,000 permit actions and facilities. The governor recommends approval of this exception request. If there's no questions, I'll move on to also on page 21, which is the fourth exception request. And again, this is an IT related request. It's for the underground injection control program in the water and wastewater systems, IT systems. The objective here is to develop a common platform with the water quality programs. The surface discharge program, or WIPDES program, has already gone through some of the updates under phase 1 of the project. But to improve permitting efficiencies and reduce maintenance costs, we're looking to move forward with phases 2 and 3. Now, phase 1 was partially funded with general funds and then also with EPA grants. So the phase 1 was about $630,000, and that's been completed. Phase 2 would take an additional, the request was for $600,000 in general funds, broken out into $400,000 in one-time costs for the development, and then $200,000 for the ongoing operation and maintenance for all 3 phases. Now, just to let you know, on the water and wastewater, right now they're using an access database. It's very outdated, and I think all of you are probably familiar with what access databases are, but it's almost going back to punch cards. But we really need to upgrade that system for efficiency purposes and to accommodate electronic permitting and compliance reporting. Again, this is part of the 2014 paperless initiative. And I also would mention, and I didn't mention this with the air quality one, but both of these IT projects were part of the step 2 budget cuts last year. And so we had it in the budget. It was removed from the budget. Now we're asking for the monies back so that we can actually complete these projects. Now, the governor's recommendation is approval of the one-time exception request for the $400,000 and denial of the ongoing request for the $200,000 O&M. And I agree with the governor's recommendation because we're going to be in the development phase, and we'll probably be back with a request for operation and maintenance in future years once we have a better sense of that after the system has been built. So that seems to make sense from that point of view.
Okay, thank you.
Co-chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Co-chair.
I'm curious in terms of the end users and if there's any, have you contemplated any fee-based component to covering ongoing costs or a portion of it?
So, Mr. Chairman, So on the fee base, depending on the program, we have not considered that in the water, on the water side of things. On the air quality side, that's why 340,000 is being covered by Title V fees.
Why not?
Uh,
On the water side.
Certainly something that we could consider making a change to the structure there. I would guess that it would require some statutory change.
I mean, is it logical that they ought to have skin in the game? As opposed to straight general funds?
It's certainly an option, yeah.
So I mean, when you compare, so I think the question comes down, I mean, is there an inherent difference between air quality and water quality that you would have a fee that helps pay for this in one and not the other? I think that's a real question.
So, Mr. Chairman, yes, under the Clean Air Act, you're required to assess a fee for.
That's inherently different.
And for the WIPDs, there is not. And in fact, we had a discussion back in, I want to say it was 2003 is when we did first time we assessed a fee of $100 per permit action for WIPDs. And it's now, I think it's $200 per permit action under WIPDs. That's the only fee that we have associated there. The cautionary note on that would be, and the reason we didn't expand it beyond using those funds for monitoring, mostly monitoring and maybe some modeling efforts. If you apply a fee or assess a fee under the WIPDs program to administer the program, EPA had told us that they would then withdraw the federal funds associated with the WIPDs program.
Also, it's like working when you're sick, you get Social Security at 62, once you keep working, pretty soon they're taking your money back.
Something like that.
Okay, got it.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, then moving on to the next budget requests on page 28. I'm sorry, it's on page 30. Page 30 is the fifth exception request. And this is for the first of two positions that we are requesting in air quality. This is for a natural resource 10 position for rules and state implementation plan program. The request is for $196,000. This would be an ongoing expense. The federal portion of this would be $14,700, which we would move back from the 900 series because this was a position that was part of the step 2 cuts last year. So you ask, well, why are we asking for the position back? And the reason was there was an election that happened, and the results of the election have dictated the amount of work that we have in different areas. I mean, that's the simplest way to put it.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Director Parfitt, remind me, when we eliminated a position last year, we eliminated the general funds, then we moved those federal funds to where you could use them for contract services down to 900. And so what we're doing in this is going to take those back to the 100 series to supplement the federal part of that to match up with the general funds on the series 100.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. So the other funds, and this gets back to the Title V fees that we assess for the air quality program, those other funds or fees would cover 137,000 of the position. We would just need authorization to spend. So that leaves a general fund request of 59,000 as a new appropriation. Now, as I mentioned, this need arises with the election of the Biden administration. In the spring of 21, the regulatory agenda alone included 70 air quality rules. and that EPA intends to develop. Put this in contrast, in 2020, we commented on 3 rules and submitted 1 state implementation plan. Now, as these rules, if they become finalized from EPA, we will then have to update the corresponding state implementation plan. So that creates additional workload. These new rules will impact Wyoming's industries and citizens, which is why it's important for the division to review and analyze and provide comment on the rules. Just to give you a sense of what we're working with, and as I mentioned, we'd have to update state implementation plans, but we have regional Haze litigation that's been ongoing. There are 3 separate litigation efforts regarding the phase or step 1 of regional Haze. One was with the Wyodak facility, where EPA disagreed and issued a FIP for regional Haze at that facility. We've got some NGOs have filed suit against the approval of our state implementation plan at the Naughton plant. And then we recently filed or sent the administrator notice of intent to sue for lack of taking non-discretionary action at the Jim Bridger plant related to regional Haze. So there's a lot going on that takes a lot of staff time to pull that together. We also have the clean power, what was the clean power plan and became the affordable clean energy rule, and that being rolled back and EPA taking another look at that. And so we'll have to be engaged in those discussions and providing input there. We have the oil and gas methane rule, which is a 500-page rule with a 200-page impact analysis that we'll need to dig into and comment on as well. EPA is also looking at modifying the ozone standard and lowering that, as well as the particulate matter. So with all of that, that's why we're asking for that position to make sure that we are engaged appropriately.
Chairman?
Go ahead, Representative
Thank you, Mr.
Schwartz.
Chairman. So I'm looking at your vacancy list for that description position. You've got a number of them on there. And there's a pretty wide salary range associated with the different positions, even though they have the same number. Could you explain that to me?
So yeah, Mr. Chairman, that depends on where they fall in that spectrum of the min and the mid that's available right now. Depends on the years of experience that they have. The more experience you have, the more value you have, the higher your salary is typically going to be.
So if I may follow up, Mr. And this one's near the high end. So the assumption is who you hire for this will require more experience.
And I don't recall, I might have to ask Ms. Wickman, but I believe it was probably posted or listed at the mid for the position.
So anyway, just looking at that, and I was looking at the same information Representative Schwartz had, and so I was looking at your engineering 10 positions, project engineer positions. Most of them have not been open very long, but in looking at those, I mean, they're running from a high of right at a little over 75 down to 60, down in the 60. The lowest one I see is probably a 62,000. So that's what we're seeing on the, but it's obviously it doesn't have the full range. So so ultimately the salary is about right just a hair lower than 75. You anticipate, what's your anticipation with respect to being able to fill these? If you, assuming that they're approved and they pass, what's your expectation? Do you think you can fill them at those salary levels?
So, Mr. Chairman, I mean, this goes back to the earlier discussion. Some positions are easier to fill than others, but we'll One of the things that we have done is expanded the net that we've thrown, meaning that we're looking to trade organizations, we're looking national organizations trying to recruit as well. But I think this being listed at the mid, depending on the experience level, our hope is that we would be able to fill that. But again, this is considering the position would be at the mid-level.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Go ahead and continue.
All right, so, Mr. Chairman, and I'll take you to the next, and the last exception request, page 31. This is the 6th exception request, and again, it's for an ENR 10 position for the ambient monitoring program. This one's a little bit different. This was not a position that we didn't cut a position in asking for it back in this instance. But the numbers are the same. It's the same position. So as I explained, the federal funds would be moved up from the 900 series, and that would be from some of the other positions that we had cut last year. The other funds or fees would cover 137,000. So what we'd be looking for is general funds of 60,000 as a new appropriation. Now, what this position would be engaged in is efforts to monitor wildfires and other exceptional events. In 2020, we had over 70 exceptional events for particulate matter and ozone. This past year, we had nearly 100 exceptional events for particulate matter and ozone. And so what are exceptional events? Exceptional events are non-anthropogenic sources of pollutants that impact our air quality monitors. And so as we're evaluating whether or not we're achieving the ambient air quality standards, we want to extract or exclude those non-anthropogenic sources. And what ends up happening during these exceptional event days is that if you don't remove those from the calculation, it will show that you are not in compliance with the ambient air quality standards. If that happens, then there are additional controls that industry needs to put on their operations and additional expenses. So we're very careful to make sure that what goes into the calculation are truly as a result of anthropogenic sources of pollutants. If we don't have somebody to do these evaluations, develop the exceptional event packages to be sent down to EPA and flag that data, then we end up with bad science driving our decisions.
Well, theoretically, the EPA ought to be doing it. They ought to have something on right above along the border of Wyoming from Utah and Idaho, because we know there's quite a bit coming in.
So, Mr. Chairman, that's an interesting point, because there's a thing called the cross-state air pollution rule. It's a good neighbor rule. In 2016, EPA had made a determination that Wyoming was contributing to the non-attainment for ozone in Denver. And they based that on the assumption that, one, they were using an East Coast model. Two, they were incorporating all emission points statewide. So from Yellowstone to Devil's Tower to Evanston to Cheyenne, everything in between was incorporated into the model.
Going to Denver?
As assuming that it was going to Denver.
So some of it comes from Salt Lake, comes to Evanston, and it goes to Denver. That's how it works.
According to the folks at EPA at that time.
Okay.
We obviously challenged that because it's just bad science.
It's the other way around, actually. When the wind blows, we get their stuff up here.
But that took a significant amount of effort of staff time to correct that viewpoint to show that we were not causing the non-attainment or contributing to the non-attainment.
When you drive between Salt Lake and Logan and go up that side of the mountain, it's amazing how hazy and you can't even see the sun. I drove that 3 times in the last 3 months. And where's that stuff going? I mean, do we have the corresponding science to demonstrate and how that affects the Green River Basin or any place else?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, yeah, we have had monitors in those areas that we could then determine whether or not or how much of a contribution might be coming from Utah. But quite frankly, I'm not sure that we've seen a contribution that we could then tie to and say, well, we're having non-attainment in the Upper Green River Basin because of what's happening in Utah. We're not seeing that. So Mr. Chairman, without the position, not all exceptional events will be done and factored into the ambient for attainment assessment purposes. To give you a sense of what these exceptional events take, it takes about 200 staff hours to prepare one exceptional event package. We had over 100 exceptional events, or nearly 100 exceptional events last year. So that would be 200,000 or 20,000 hours of staff
So,
time.
Mr. Co-Chair, when you say exceptional events, are you talking about all the wildfires in Washington and Oregon and California?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. And they impact the air monitors that we have within the state, which shows an exceedance. We need to extract those from the calculations on whether or not we're achieving the ambient air quality standard. Otherwise, it becomes a non-attainment area, and then the expense to put in new controls or additional controls on industry.
Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Parfitt, on that, when you talk about those exceptional events, does that also impact, particularly on wildfires, your pushback on regional hazing too? Are you able to track the contribution of that?
Mr. Chairman, a great deal of the work that's done with regional haze is done with modeling, complex modeling, where we can make those demonstrations. But yes, it could potentially have an adverse effect on what's happening there. But right now, it's more along the lines of EPA using different input variables to their modeling efforts versus what we used in ours, where they end up with different results. So it's really tied to the modeling more so than.
And Mr. Chairman, the only reason I asked that is just memory serves me back from my mineral days that you had, at least as I recall it, you indicated that a lot of the regional haze contribution is ammonia and those sorts of things attached to with wildfires.
Yeah, well, certainly some of the haze, it definitely is attributable to the wildfires that you're seeing across the West.
And thus I was wondering if noting those exceptional events would help us in our arguments. That's what I was wondering. Thank you, Director.
Anyway, so Mr. Chairman, the governor recommends approval of this exception request. I would point out that on page 32 of the budget book, you'll see that the other 340,000 of the we had talked about for the impact system.
Impact, yeah, this is the 340 that's from the special revenue fund, the 150 that matches the 150 we had earlier from general fund. Right.
Correct.
So
Why don't we go ahead and ask this question? We're gonna go ahead and take our mid-morning break here.
So, Todd, are we doing everything we can in this regard? Because this is a big important enough issue that we ought to be first in class on our ability to measure and document outside influences that are impacting what's going on in Wyoming.
We could always do more. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, but yeah, we could always do more. We do with what we have resources for. There are efforts on I would say a regional basis to get an understanding of the impacts of air quality coming from other states. And we work closely with Colorado and Utah and, you know, the Region 8 states in particular.
Have we done a cost benefit analysis of if we did more or what it would cost and what our benefits would be?
Mr. Chairman, I don't think we've done a cost benefit analysis as you're referring to. What we have done is had conversations with EPA on the exceptional events to see if there's a way to streamline the process, because as I pointed out, these are kind of the no-brainers. We know there was a wildfire. We can show there was a wildfire on these dates. We know that there should be an exceptional event. Why do we need to put the same level of effort, the 200 hours that goes into an exceptional event package, when we all know what's happening here? So we've tried to work with EPA to streamline that process. One of the other problems was that we were sending exceptional event packages down to EPA, and they just, quite frankly, don't have the bandwidth to review all of those. And so they go on a shelf until somebody wants to do an analysis, and then they have to make sure that they remember to incorporate those. So that has been a problem, and we've tried to work with EPA to streamline that process.
And so, Mr. Co-Chair, I mean, do we need assistance with our friends in Washington to help facilitate that and to make it so that it doesn't just sit on the shelf and gather dust, and depending on who wants to look?
So, Mr. Chairman, yeah, you know, but it's one of those where it's a resource issue for EPA. So they have a requirement, but they don't have the resources to review what's being submitted.
Yeah, it's like pushing a rope. You can push the rope all you want, but eventually it just keeps coiling up at some place. So it doesn't go any further.
Chairman?
Okay.
This was their last exception. Is there any more that we need to go through before we break?
Is there, I think that was that is your last exception.
That is the last exception.
Okay, is there any other questions for our good friends at DEQ before we take our mid-morning break? Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Director Parfitt. We appreciate your time and your team's effort this morning. You guys, what you guys do is obviously so essential, important to health and the industry of Wyoming, both on both sides. So we appreciate the work you do and the razor's edge you guys have to walk at times. So thank you.
All right, well, thank you.
You know, I was in St. George in a couple weeks. So we're coming back from St. George. bring joint appropriations back to order, and our next, I think our next agency is Department of Revenue. So come on up, Brenda, bring your team.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Craig Grenvick, the Administrator of the Mineral Tax Division. May I remove?
Oh, please do. We can't understand any, we don't know what you just said.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having us here. Karen, jump out on me for a second.
But we have Senator Kinski's tuning in as he drives down here, so he's on Zoom, and other than that, Representative Stith will be back momentarily, I would assume, and Senator Hicks is not here, so. you're
Okay.
on.
Karen, if you'd be so kind to pull up the presentation, thank you. We're here today. Brenda gets to talk about the tough stuff later on, about the money. I'm just here to try to give you an update where we
You
are.
need to pull the mic closer, please.
Try to give you an update where we are with the monthly ad valorem payments.
Great. We were going to ask you about that anyway, so thank you for acting proactively.
All right, Karen, if you would, please. Next slide. And the next one, please, Karen.
And
Brief.
for members, you have, I think you, if you don't know, you have one of these. So
The topics are, I'm going to give a really brief general recap. And the one thing about this presentation is there's a lot of pages, and so it makes all the committee members worried, but a lot of these are going to
it
slide
does.
through.
My experience is
really-
it's at least 2 minutes a page. We don't have this much time.
All right, good. That helps me as well.
Okay.
Okay. So, yes, keep going down through them. There you go. That's fine. I'm going to give a general recap of how we got to Senate File 60, why we have the monthly ad valorem payments. I'm going to talk a little bit about the need that the department has for a couple amendments to fall in line with what we're attempting to accomplish here and how we're going about it. We'll talk a little bit about the workload issues. I know the last time I was in front of this committee, you were asking about, okay, you're going to need any more personnel or money. I'll briefly run through the workload and what we may need. I will go through a high-level run of our processes. There's going to be a number of flow charts that our programmers have gone through. That's their first step, and then they develop stories and coding developments off of that. I'm not going to go into the very detailed ones. I'm just going to show you what they are. Twofold reasons. One, to show you that there's a lot more going on behind the scenes, and that we have made some pretty significant progress on critical processes. Next slide, please, Karen. In general, we had a major downturn in the mineral industry from 2015 to 2017. Obviously, coal was a major factor there, but also in oil and gas. And unlike how we were structured 20, 30 years ago with many majors that constituted the bulk of our value, now we have mid-majors and independents, smaller companies. So that made them much more vulnerable to the bankruptcies that we saw during this time period. The state was also hit by a few bankruptcies, but not nearly to the extent. And the difference between the severance tax and the ad valorem is that the severance tax is collected 1 month, 25 days. And basically the county money through the ad valorem tax comes in first November, the year following the year of production, and then May after that. So this time lag was something that was identified by the 16-17 Joint Revenue Committee. And they felt that collecting ad valorem on the same timeline as severance would be beneficial. The first iteration of trying to do that was in 2020 with House Bill 159, and then earlier this year, Senate File 60 was passed. Next, please. From the department's perspective, The difficulty with Senate File 60 is it would require us changing our severance forms, which means retooling our system. And it also would have required industry to change the way their monthly filing was as well. So the idea that someone in our office came up with was that, hey, we have all the information initially when they report it. Why make them change the way they're reporting it? Why don't we just generate an invoice for them and we can send it out and all they have to do is pay that invoice. So it really streamlined the process. Otherwise, not only would we be working on it, but the industry would have to be working on it. But what that has caused is obviously there's a time delay now that we have to generate the invoice. And so we have some amendments that Brenda herself actually cooked up, listening to how this should work. So that was wonderful working with her and having her input to figure this out. And we would like to have those changed. It would help us administratively too. It would allow us basically to treat the annual filers like monthly filers. So they're just filing in December. So that really streamlines our process as well. But
So are these amendments, did you guys run these by the Revenue Committee or Minerals? Are they running that, or is this in process with somebody taking this on?
Director Henson, correct me if I'm wrong, but yes, those amendments are in front of the Revenue Committee, as well as amendments that I believe the counties would like. I don't know who else has chimed in, but a working group was put together.
Okay.
Welcome, Brenda.
Mr. Chairman, Brenda Henson, Department of Revenue. That amendment has been drafted, and it was posted last Friday on the the Revenue Committee's agenda and website. So you can go out there and take a look at that. But I will tell you that the language that was compiled to address this reporting, and then 1 month later, the payment being due, it's the exact same language that I provided to you back in September. So that piece has not changed. What has changed is the two items that the counties and producers wanted addressed related to the delayed payment of second half 2020. And
Mr. Chairman, she's got a very soft voice. If she could get close to the mic, it'd be appreciated.
Hurry up and get here.
I apologize. But at any rate, so the amendment that you'll see that Revenue Committee is considering on the 15th of December has the language that I provided to this committee back in September, along with two other items that are specific to the delayed payments that county treasurers are collecting for second half 2020 production and all of 2021 production. But you definitely can go out there to the LSO website and take a look at that bill.
Thank you. Okay, keep going.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, just addressing the workload and issues surrounding it. I used 2019 because last year was clearly an anomaly, and hopefully they seem to be a little bit back on pace. 21 counties received monthly transmittal because that's how many counties had mineral production. In 2019, there were 108 tax districts statewide that had mineral production. The reason that this is significant was that the counties had expressed the need to have everything calculated down at the tax district level, not just at the county level. And the only way for us to do that, it would be the point in the next slide, is that 610 producers filed monthly. That reflects about 32,000 properties they file on a monthly basis. So when we generate the invoices back to the counties, there'll be 32,000 roughly line items that they'll have detail for. There's also a provision here that creates an annual filers, have a little bit different timeline. And just to give everyone a background, there were about 1,400 yearly severance tax returns, meaning individual line items, with 208 annual filers. That's quite significant, but the the relative amount of money that they're submitting isn't nearly as prolific as the number of them. About 4.75 million in actual tax was submitted that way, which is only 0.64%. The other thing that we have to take into consideration are the exemptions. And there are 8 counties, or 8 companies in 2 counties that have 2,500 reporting properties that are exempted from this. So we have to take that into consideration so we don't send them a monthly bill. Indeed, there will be added workload, particularly upfront for admin services division when we have to identify any payment that comes in, unfortunately, without any advice. And there definitely will be more workload on the mineral tax division. We are trying to move some responsibilities around to see how we can handle it. But right now, we're not requesting anything in terms of personnel or added budget, but we shall see. We shall see.
So Greg, on the 8 companies in 2 counties that have been exempted from monthly payment, I thought, my recollection of the statute was that they could come to various, there was some authority to represent or to provide for settlement opportunities with counties and local companies. And so when we've got 8 companies represented from monthly filing payment from county commissioners, so that those folks what's the overlap between those 8 companies and the annual filers? Is there overlap? There are these large companies who would not fall in the annual filers that are now exempted from monthly payment by commissioners.
Yeah, my recollection is they all would be monthly filers. I don't believe there are any annual filers.
What county?
On that list. I believe the counties are Lincoln and Sublette.
Lincoln and Sublette. Okay, thank you.
Next slide, please. You can pull them all up at once. I'll try to blow through this. Overall, I just want to talk about the timelines, the overall monthly process, the filing of severance returns, generating ad valorem exemptions, which means they don't have to pay monthly, calculation of the ad valorem tax penalty and interest, because that is required, the basically account closure, the remittance of the ad valorem tax to us, the payment processing, daily distribution, and I also have a monthly distribution, and the Wolf's interface is to get it from our shop here in revenue to get it over to state auditor's office and for them to cut the warrants. And then finally, the county transmittal letters in the spreadsheets that we were sending out. Basically, we have the next slide, please.
Greg, do we have an estimate of the amount of tax, particularly ad valorem tax, that was lost in the mineral bankruptcies that actually precipitated this and was the catalyst behind this effort?
I can't speak for the counties. I believe it was a little over 5 million in severance tax that we did not collect in this time frame.
But you'd think since ad valorem tax was collected a year to 18 months after that, and without the lien, without the preferred lien, it would, I mean,
I had heard, I believe I recall county officials saying it was over 100 million, right around that level.
All right, thank you, appreciate that.
Sure.
Quick follow-up on those, Mr. Coacher, on the 8 companies in 2 counties, the 250 reporting properties. What is that percentage of total ad valorem dollars that are collected?
I apologize, Mr. Chairman. I didn't run that through. I can certainly get that to you. A rough guess, probably 15%, maybe 20 tops.
So in essence,
20 might be high.
All those are delayed by a year regardless then.
Yes.
Right? It partly defeats the purpose of what we're doing.
That's a policy decision. Okay. Yeah.
Anyway, on the monthly timelines, basically there's just on the bottom row is showing the difference between the annual and the monthly, and the annuals file in December, and on the right is the January filing. Basically, what it means is for the annuals, they have to file February 25th. Starting with the 8th of March, we do a nightly batch where it calculates all the tax and interest. The following night, we do account closure. And on the 10th, we issue the invoices to the various companies. We'll send it to them all PDF. Other than we have 4 taxpayers out there who do not have internet access. Needless to say, they're annual filers, so we'll have to file those through the mail, but it's not too much money to concern one with. Just following along, it's the same timeline. And then the industry wanted 15 days in order to respond to this. So they have 15 days from the 10th in order to remit that. Obviously, gross details here, but sometimes the 25th is on a weekend or on a holiday, and we got to move those timelines up. And then on the 25th, we receive those, and it is anticipated that will only take one night basically to run all of these remittances and get that posted overnight and sent off to the state auditor's office. And then the following day has been the Admin Services Division and Revenues experience that those are all cut back to us from the state auditor's office. And then we will be, right now, Christy Urich, who is the head of our Admin Services Division, has talked to all the county treasurers. At least initially, they're wanting them as warrants, as paper checks, and we want those back to us too. We want to make sure the process is working the way it is before we just send it off and have the state auditor's office send them out. Now, the good thing at that stage is we're talking about 21 checks with details, and we'll be sending details to the county on a PDF of the paper document, as well as a worksheet, a spreadsheet for them to put together and look through.
And this is your initial run. This is trying to figure out, and that's how you're going to figure out if your process works. Is that kind of what I'm understanding this explanation?
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah, we want to be able to see all the pieces and parts before we just start saying, oh, well, somebody else can handle it. No.
Send it before you push the button and have it generated electronically.
Yeah, obviously, we're going to be doing some testing. I'll get to that here a little bit later. This is basically the only diagram I'm going to go through at any length. There are 3 ways to report to us from the taxpayer. One is on paper, which we completely do not encourage. We discourage that, or through what is called WIFS, Wyoming Information Filing System. They can either file an ASCII file, or they can go through our actual website. I'm going to go through the Severance website rather than the ASCII. ASCII is just a file with a bunch of numbers in it. It doesn't mean anything. So what the process is now is they submit the severance tax returns to us. Now we have the capability of taking a look at new properties to actually tie them to registration, so we know which tax district they go in, which is a definite plus that we didn't have before. We process those returns, and we kick out ad valorem invoice. They get sent to the companies. The taxpayers remit it to us, our Admin Services Division. We'll take a look at it. Now they can file with us or pay with us 3 ways: check, wire, or through the internet, which is HCH debit, which I'm going to be showing you, but it's not the preferred method. Their preferred method is ACH credit or wire. That way they're in control of it. And this is probably the one area that may bog us down, is making sure they give us the proper advice. If we got to start looking and hunting and pecking to where does this money go, that might slow us down some. But we're not unfamiliar with this process, but because we have to do it on the severance side, but it may be something new and additional. Once that happens, the Admin Services Division gets it posted, send it off to us. We tie the invoice to the money, and then the Admin Services Division sends it off to the SAO. Like we're saying, they will now cut the warrants, come back to us, and we will be sending out, Christie will be sending out the warrants, her division. We will be sending out, we being Mineral Tax Division, out the actual support for all that, both in a PDF format, so it's kind of readable, and also in a spreadsheet. Down below, all this really is talking about is when the treasurers receive it, they'll have to distribute it, and then once a year, they will be sending us the mill levies, the new mill levies that we'll upload into our system, so we have a new estimated tax. So next. Please, Karen, thank you. All right, this is our Wyoming Internet Filing System. You log in, throw in your password. Next, please. The button here is highlighted. This is where you go to file your returns. You click on that button, and then you get the next slide.
Before we move on, Craig, on that slide prior, you might point out the paragraph that we added related to the ad valorem monthly. And to just, so basically, this is just letting you know that the severance tax system, nothing that we're showing you today is new. It's already existing, it's in place, the producers are familiar with it, but we did add the paragraph that talks about effective January 2022, that filing of your severance tax information will also make you compliant with filing for your monthly ad valorem, so that they recognize that their process has not changed in any way, shape, or form. And the slides that follow here just emphasize that they aren't going to have to change their systems at all. But
Correct. And the fact that you still have to file your annual gross products returns, because there's much more data with that. We do reconciliations, and that's how you file for stripper and various other reports. So that's what that's about. So basically, the next 2, 3, 4, 5 slides are all just about filing your severance return through the Wyoming information filing system. So we're just about slide 15. Yes, there you go. Then this is when you're online and you're able to see it. And that's why I wanted to show you this aspect of it. It's actually something that's somewhat meaningful. Here's your filing basically $32,500 in value, which translates to $1,950 in severance tax. And you click that, you get to the next slide, which says now Form 3000, which is severance, is added to an envelope, which is basically just a bucket that you send everything in that you want to. Usually there's many line items, but didn't want to go through that. Click on that, you get to slide 17. And then you get a notification down below that your severance tax envelope has web returns. You click on that. And then it gives you the submit envelope button, and you click that. Then all of a sudden there's options. You can update, you can cancel, you can update and cancel, but this is kind of if you submit this one, now you're dealing with Department of Revenue. Be sure you want to submit this. Once you do that, you get your confirmation. The big thing here is that you can see that you have reported your 1,950. Slide 21, get to, this is what the folks in the Mineral Tax Division see. The main thing here is that status. A lot of times they come ready for posted, but if there's a warning, if there's a pricing anomaly, too high, too low, and deduction too high, too low, then these items are worked, and then they're cleared, or we contact the company and they say to change this or change that. And once that's clear, we get to the next slide. When you clear it, you get ready for posting. It posts into our system. And again, this is all severance. This is nothing different than what we do. This is nothing different what the companies do. It's all the same. Now, the next 3 slides, I'm not going to talk about in detail. Probably because I really can't. This is kind of coder language stuff. They're mentioning tables in databases, but these, I did want to show you this, that it's not an automatic process. There's some thought and detail behind this. The first one's really what Christie's group has to deal with. Slide 24. Is the ad valorem mill levy exceptions. This is how to identify and make sure we don't send monthly notices to those who are exempt. And 25 is the calculation of the actual ad valorem tax and any interest and penalty. Now, starting with slide 27, this is what our users are going to be seeing in some of the steps in here. This is actual GUI. This is actually what has been already developed. And that's how some in my group, some in Christie's group are going to be handling this. You click on the ad val mill levy exceptions so you don't send out the ones you shouldn't be. The next one comes down to creating the ad valorem accounting closure, which handles all the tax penalty and interest. And then slide 28 is the magic button that creates the ad valorem invoice. The next group of slides are the estimated ad valorem invoice.
Just so when on slide 28, that's the magic button that creates the ad valorem invoice. That's the same. That's very similar to what essentially that's the same process as when we produce the severance tax invoice. Is that right? Is it the same thing?
What's different about it is that, in a nutshell, the companies send us their severance tax information and they send us a check at the same time. Versus with the ad valorem, we're taking that severance information that they sent us and we're creating their ad valorem bill. So they don't have to, they don't go through that process. They're just waiting for the Department of Revenue to get it right. Send them the invoice.
And the difference is that you got all these taxing districts, and so the levies are different. So you have, that's why you have to take this and give it and push it back at them. Okay,
that's correct.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead, Representative Stith.
Chairman, Director, you didn't have a lot of time to prepare this. About how much time did it take to get this software up and running and this portal done? And did you, and I should know this, but did you do it in-house or did you have a consultant do it? And how much did it cost? And how much long did it take?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith. So this process had started prior to my arrival on August 2nd. But this major turning point where the determination was made to go ahead and take advantage of our severance tax system and use every component that we could. But I will tell you, and that's one reason for all of the flow chart, is to recognize that it has been very time consuming. This entire process and trying to ensure that we're covering all the bases has really been daily meetings with both our programmer, MBS. We were able to take advantage of our maintenance contract that we have. That's the company that is the vendor for our excise and mineral tax system currently. We were able to take advantage of some programming hours that were meant for legislative changes, up to 4,000 hours. We were able to take advantage of that to institute these programming changes. So fortunately, that meant that we didn't have to go out and enter into an additional contract. You may recall that Senate File 60 included $274,000 for from LISRA funds to fund the programming changes. Fortunately, we didn't have to tap into that. We'll be remitting that back. The one thing I will say when we get through the presentation, we know that there may be reporting components that maybe county treasurers may want that they haven't even thought of yet. You know, once we get into this program, I think other things will come up. And so, you know, we may in the future need to make some tweaks, but fortunately, with the staff that Craig has being very dedicated to this process and making sure that we knew, I mean, it's January 31st. It has to be done. It has to be tested. We have to be ready to go out the door because our first filers will be those annual filers that'll be providing the information of 2021 production. So the annual filers are going to be our first run. And then the very next following month is when we'll start doing the processing those monthly filers. So hopefully I've answered your question in that we hope we haven't missed anything. We've hoped that through the discussion with the vendor and treasurers and producers that we've covered everything, but we also know it is a new program and we aren't so ignorant to know that everything's going to work perfect right out the chute. But
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It just seems quite impressive that you were able to get this much done that fast.
Oh, did you blow through the 4,000 hours in the first month or the second month?
we're still working on those
Still working
4,000
on that
hours,
4,000
Mr.
hours?
Chairman. And fortunately, the company doesn't bill us 4,000 hours for everyone that sits. Because when I say we've had daily meetings, we're talking not just Craig's staff, but we're talking all of the programmers and the folks that are working on these stories and these flow charts. And it really has been something that, you know, failure is not an option, obviously.
And so just going back, to an earlier slide, if you have 201 annual filers, and you've got 610 producers, those is right about 400 of the producers are the ones who will be filing monthly. If they're not filing annual, then they're filing monthly, right?
So Mr. Chairman, we anticipate that every one of those producers, almost probably 500 when we get things up and going, you know, those are an invoice that our system will need to generate every month. And those are checks that will be coming in. Granted, for that producer, it's one check statewide. And then we're the entity, we will be taking that one check and then distributing that to however many counties that production was made in and applying the mill levies and sending that transmittal to the treasurer's office. But that extra workload for us is sending out an invoice, you know, making sure that check clears the bank, those types of things.
And so when you're so when January 31st comes and here comes your first batch of the 200 or so annual filers, which results in, according to the slide, 1,400 severance tax returns that come from those 200 because you're filing those in all the different 108 taxing districts, right?
Correct.
And so that's your dry run. And then you have, once that's over, and then the monthly producing starts as first paid at first in May, right?
That's when the counties would receive their first payment, yes.
And so that's when all of a sudden you start getting hit with an avalanche of 32,000 monthly severance tax returns. They're not going to be monthly returns, but you're going to have to, anyway, go ahead, Greg, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, yeah, we'll be receiving those January production period severance tax returns in March. And so we'll be issuing the invoices in April and getting the money in the end of April and then sending that out.
So my point, and that's what I'm highlighting, is that so you've got this, the annual filers come in, so February the 1st, it gets really exciting. And then that's nothing compared with how exciting it's going to get in April.
Correct.
And so, all right. And so I mean, so what happens if we find a glitch in between in April or March before we get to the monthly filers? I mean, I feel for you. This is a huge deal and there's a lot of pressure on your office. And I'm just wondering how, I mean, I'm sorry, I don't think I fully comprehended some of this a year ago. So anyway.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, you know, where it'll start down the line is that first month that we're getting monies remitted from prior year report, or excuse me, prior month report. So once we hit that April, the 25th day of April, where we're getting money, and we're also getting the monthly report that we'll be billing and then distributing in May. So it definitely is going to be a process to make sure we get that workflow and to make sure that we're not missing anything. Now, the majority of this is automated. The majority of it, you know, once we've identified the tax group for every group ID, it should flow fairly well. But what you have identified is what we're concerned about. Those little things like, well, what if they send us more money than what the invoice was for?
Oh, that'll never happen. The invoice will never match the amount. They'll always match the amount of the check you get. So I'm sure. So that,
You know, just trying to work with these companies related to sometimes their person that's reporting severance is not in tune with the ad valorem side of it. Just making sure that these companies have the personnel to deal with both sides. But again, I always state, the other part of that is once we send out one check to that county treasurer, now it's incumbent on them to take every one of those taxing districts, and whether the mill levy was 61 mills and they have a total amount from producer AB, now they've got to distribute that money monthly to all of the taxing entities. And then keep track of that, because that gross products report that Craig talked about that still comes due, and we have to reconcile to the year following the year of production. After we reconcile that for values, then the county treasurers are going to have to reconcile all of those monthly payments that they received and distributed to the taxing entities. And you could have situations where the value didn't change, the tax amount didn't change, but the tax district changed. And so they just need to pull it from this fire district and give it to this fire district. All that reconciliation process still has to occur as it normally, with our normal timeline. So
now that's going to happen monthly instead of just annually.
exactly.
For the county
And
treasurer.
so, you know, we're not doing amended returns for the ad valorem. That reconciliation will only occur one time a year. And so, you know, definitely we're hoping that we've thought of all the various situations, but we will handle them as they come along. The key is to get the money to the taxing entities as soon as possible.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator Drew.
Okay. Just a question here. So I'm on 28 and I'm filling out my reports and I hit this ad valorem invoice generation. All that information you have up before that point, but if I fill it out wrong, I'm just a guy on the field filling this out and this invoice comes out and it's way off. And I put in, maybe I've inputted wrong, you know, go whatever in, whatever out. Is there a way for me then to go back now? I'm looking here along the sidebar. Is there a go back button for me so I can go back and redo this, or do I have to wait till the end of the year to true this up, or how does that work exactly? Or even if it's like I want to appeal that I think I filled it out wrong, but it came back with a number that I don't have, and I'm just trying to.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Drew.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yes, we're not going to be processing any amendments for ad valorem purposes. We still are going to process amendments for the severance. Keeping in mind that traditionally and still going forward, we are going to require them to file their annual gross products returns. And so prior to this process, the old way, so to speak, they didn't have any opportunity to amend their ad valorem until that following year anyway. As we were kicking this around, there really isn't any incentive for them to not file correctly because they're still going to be dinged on the severance side for any underpayments or underreporting. So that makes them want to, file these things correctly the first time. The other thing this does, when we talk to the vendor, they like this because otherwise we'd be running basically another accounting system for the ad valorem portion as well as the severance. They said, well, that's another system. Don't talk to us about this amount of money here. So that was consideration. The other thing is having it staggered this way. It may not be obvious to everybody here, but those of us who've been in the trenches with this, having a specific invoice for paying the ad valorem payment separate from the severance is very beneficial. Otherwise, it'd been coming as one payment. We'd have to split it. We'd have to make a decision. Oh, should we pay all of this severance first? Or should we pay the ad valorem first? This is a way of doing what we can to keep those monies specific to where they were intended to be paid. But to your question, the amendments to the gross products value will be done through the normal NOVC process. That's what the county treasurers are used to. That will be in their hands. And when they file their initial gross products return, if they had any adjustments they needed to be made, they won't have to make those. Those will be part of the reconciliation process because we already know that these are estimated ad valorem rates, right? So we know that adjustment has to be made, but the value can be adjusted at the same time.
So I think his question goes back to ultimately, once the envelope is submitted, there is, that's why you're asking to make sure that their envelope's correct, because that's the last opportunity to correct it without some kind of manual intervention. I think that's is that correct?
And Mr. Chairman, Senator Grew, I do think it's important to know it goes both ways. If they report less than they should have, the same thing holds true. That won't be reconciled until we certify values the following year. So it goes both ways. But I truly believe that if they're having some issues ensuring that they're reporting accurately, that since we're doing this monthly, there's going to be, there's more visibility. I think we're going to ultimately have better values in the long run than we have historically when we're issuing so many NOVCs. At least that's our hope, is that it's every month they're taking a look at this and looking at that invoice. And if they're messing up the severance tax reporting and it's following through to the ad valorem both ways, hopefully. Now, I'm not saying that perhaps in the future we might not have to come back and relook at that. We'll see how that goes. But from the producers that we've had communication with, they seem to be fine with it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So go ahead.
So Brenda, you made it, Mr. Chairman, Director Hanson, you made a comment just a minute ago where he says the most important thing is to get these monies out to the taxing districts. And I thought the most important thing, based on the reason we made this change, is to collect the money from the company. So once it's in the possession of the state, then we can breathe a little bit. And so from my perspective of that, did we ever give any, or did we ever contemplate maybe saying to the counties, because there's a lot of reconciliation to those taxing districts, that they could do that annually? Because we got the money now, we've distributed to the counties. Did we contemplate or ever consider just letting them do their portion back to the remaining taxing districts on an annual basis like they have previously, or is that?
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that was a component of a piece of past legislation that was not put in place with this. That past legislation had the Department of Revenue collecting the dollars and then holding those dollars until actual values were certified and mill levies applied. And then we were going to distribute it to county treasurers. But the way this law was implemented, we have the delayed tax amounts that are out there via Senate File 60, and distributing that money now in a timely manner is very important because that is their revenue source now for those taxes that we've delayed. So while it was contemplated, it's not how it
Sure.
worked in the final bill.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then one other question on, like on page 21, where you have the status warnings that come back. Is that on some kind of, is that in your office? Is that in your office? Is that where that shows up if there's a status warning?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. That's the actual GUI screen that our people who process look at this.
And so what's the process when you've got that status warning? Is there a message that goes back to the reporter, the reporting entity, that, you know, the mineral company, or how do you resolve that warning? And is there a second opportunity there to correct something? And do they have to, how do they fix their envelope? So their envelope.
Yes, we can reject that particular line item. We can work it just saying warning noted. If it's an error, if it's a fatal error, as in this company isn't registered to this property, then we will contact them and they have the opportunity to fix it before we send out the invoice.
Mr. Chairman, that was one of the reasons for when we have the amendment that is being considered by revenue, that there's that time period. It buys us time from the 25th of the month when they report to us. We've got 10 days to actually work these issues. You know, if we've got a reporting group that we don't have assigned a tax district or whatever the case may be because it's new production. We've got 10 days at the Department of Revenue to get those items resolved before we generate those invoices. We'll be generating the invoices in batch, not every day as we get these reports in, but we'll do them one time. So we've got some time to identify, have that communication with the taxpayer before we hit that button to generate the invoice. And then the taxpayer has 15 days to pay on that invoice. So hopefully that will buy us enough time with these issues. And as I indicated, hopefully once we have the issue addressed the first time, it's not an issue for following reports. So hopefully that helps.
So one other question on, so when I go back here and look at the envelope submission pages, and there's a place where you can amend and submit, or you can cancel. Where was it?
Senator Chairman, that's for working that particular item you're working on that.
Right, and so
on that day, or you can start a new envelope.
Right.
For severance purposes to change what it previously.
And so if the whole thing, if it turns out and there's a problem, is there ability to cancel the envelope and resubmit the envelope?
If they have not submitted it, they can cancel the whole envelope or work specific line items. Yes.
Okay. All right, thanks. I was just had some experiences recently in the EFTPS system for federal payroll taxes, and it's fairly similar, but anyway, thank you.
Okay.
Keep going.
All right. Basically, slides 29 through 36 are basically the letter transmittal of the estimated ad valorem tax invoice that we're going to go out to the companies, and it'll list every reporting group. It'll list every county it's in, every mineral, the mill levy that we loaded into it, that we received from the counties. And obviously this is back on 29, sorry, Karen. Yeah. Obviously, we're not going to have the top bar there. That was just to highlight the fact that the one line item that we were going through, already shown in previous slides, comes through on this. Again, the main takeaway is, what production period, what reporting group, the tax district in which county, and I'll show you the mill levy and the calculated ad valorem tax on that.
And that's generated monthly?
Yes.
These are generated monthly?
Yes. And the importance of going through this is it will show you not only the ad valorem tax ledger, but also interest ledger and penalty ledger. That gets you down to your total on slide 36. So now on slide 37. Thank you, Karen. Here's where you can go back in and you can make your payments through the internet filing system. This is ACH debit, so it really isn't used that often. Typically, we get wires. We get a few checks, but wires come in with their own invoice, but there's nothing really to show relative to our system on that. So basically, you log in and you click in the payments, and you get to slide 39. And using this
And so,
method.
and what you said earlier, this doesn't happen very often.
It isn't that common. No. Because they don't want it set up where we're going into their bank account and telling how much we get. They want to set it, make it available with ACH credit or wires. But this does highlight what is nice is that they are getting a specific invoice with a specific amount. As long as, they're trusting what we're sending them, all they have to do is pay this. They don't have to treat it like the severance where they have to file a brand new form. They've got to come up with the ad valorem mill levy. They don't have to do anything. All they have to do is make adjustments to their system and accounts payable versus the reporting.
So when the wires come in, what's the reference for your application? So you know what quarter to apply the payment or what pay. So what's the reference if you get a wire? So I mean, I get it when it's like when this is resulted in ACH payment, what you've got here. But when the wire comes in, you've got. I mean, I guess it's the only thing you have to relate back to is the invoice number. That's going to be the connect where now you'll know where and how to apply it.
Mr. Chairman, yes, the severance tax invoice is clearly, it should almost always be different than what the ad valorem is because the mill levies should never be perfectly 6% or 7%. Right. But that might be a question more for Christy Urich. Her group handles that. They do a fair amount of research, and this very well may be a portion of the log jam that if there's a problem, we may need more resources. We won't know until we deal with it.
Okay.
Slide 40 is just your WISE payment confirmation. 41 is how Christie's group, everything they got to do to get that ad valorem payment posting going through. 42 and 43 are the ad valorem daily distribution and monthly distribution. Actually, 44 is monthly as well. And the key here is that everything that hits our office and gets posted nightly on a daily, and then we'll run the monthly. And it's a way for basically Christy to double check, making sure that all those dailies add up to that monthly return before she approves and sends the request off to the Wolf system, to the SAO. And 45, you can see the buttons you hit, and all this other stuff is the XML file. And you can see why I didn't want to show you an ASCII file either. It's not anything that really makes a whole lot of sense to anybody, but maybe a programmer. And then on slide 46, these are actually two separate buttons. Once it comes back from the SAO office, we can click the ad valorem monthly distribution transmittal letter report and the worksheet report. That way they have PDF hard copy as well as a spreadsheet backup detail for that. Page 47 is what the county will see. Obviously, this is just one page of it. Again, The yellow isn't going to be up top. It's just a highlight to be able to see it a little better. And it will show the county, the op ID, the company, the reporting group, tax district, the production period, the payment when it's received, the mineral, the taxable value, again, the mill levy rate, and the amount that was paid. Now, there's some other detailing here that we're taking into consideration, like the third line that's a reference to, okay, they reported it in a prior month, but they didn't pay it all. So now we got to handle something else. But I didn't go into any detail on that in this presentation, but these are a lot of other little items that we got to think about in our experience of dealing with the severance returns on how to handle this.
Okay, and so on page 47, you make a wire transfer back to the county, and then they get this, and this is what tells them what to do with that money that you wired.
Correct. I believe, at least initially, I think the county treasurers are kind of in the same boat. They want to check. They may request that later. It's really something Christie's probably more familiar with. And the thing I should really reiterate in all of this, on this distribution activity, while it is new that it's ad valorem tax, Christie and her shop, this stuff is kind of old hat on. They do these transmittals to the county. They receive these checks in, so it's not something out of the blue for them either.
Mr. Chairman, if I may follow up, I know with the transmittals, we've worked with the county treasurers because obviously the PDF, the report that you see here, that is the piece that they have a record. You know, they're going to get 12 of these a year. It's going to list everybody that we collected money from, and then that we're forwarding on to them, included in that one warrant, that check. But the Excel spreadsheet that will have this similar information, they'll be able to load that digitally into their tax collection system so that they're not having to do data entry of all of these lines of specific data. And so we're hopeful that will make their process somewhat easier as well.
And they do that now. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, as a part of tax roll, they have a total value for that company in that tax district, and they send out a bill, but it's one bill per year, and then they get two payments at November and then the following May. So it's still where you've got the double the workload, keeping in mind this money then distributes. We've still got the reconciliation process where we have to figure out where the taxpayer may either owe more money or there needs to be a refund. If there's a refund, it's not that the treasurer's office has money to refund back. It's that they have to get that money from the taxing entities that they distributed it to, get that money back, and then apply the refund to that producer. We'll all be happy when we get through the first 12 months of this process and make sure that we're good to go.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions about that process, or other questions regarding the progress of the adjustment or adjustment to the monthly payment process? Thank you. Godspeed on that effort. Okay. I guess now we're to the budget. Thank you for the update.
Absolutely. We'll look forward to visiting with you all on January 11th on our budget. So.
Oh, we're not going to talk about your budget today? Oh.
Want to?
No, Mr. Chairman, the budget is scheduled in January.
Oh, we got them here.
Is that the way this works?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Brenda. Appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you for your team. You've only got 20 exception requests, so that's not bad. Okay. Where are we? Where are we? Don?
Mr. Chairman, that actually concludes the morning's session. We did reach out to both Game and Fish and the Board of Tourism. Neither were able to join you this morning. We did add the Department of Agriculture to this afternoon's agenda, which will be a little bit more aggressive. But as far as the morning goes,
That's it. So we're set for fire prevention, electrical safety to show up at 1?
that's correct.
Okay.
You're looking at this, assuming we come back at 12:30 instead of 1. Or 1. I don't think fire prevention is going to take half an hour, and I doubt that the district attorney's office is going to take half an hour. So I just we got to alert public defender and ag that. Yeah, okay.
We'll do so. Yep.
And what's your preference on our lunch break?
Well, I mean, there's not a reason to come back before 1. So are there any items of business that the body'd like to, members of the committee like to take up now? If not, we'll go study budgets and be ready for this afternoon, or take care of other personal business that sometimes can't wait. So if there's nothing